Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another debate dissection where we're taking apart the greatest and latest debates sometimes to see what killed it and cause of death. So get ready for some surgery, get ready for some official autopsy of a Bart Ehrman versus Kyle Butt debate. But joining me is my wonderful and fabulous co-host, Ember. Here, Ems.
Hello, hello.
Hello. And this one, I have never seen Bart Ehrman in a sort of much of a formal debate before. I think I've seen him in a couple of things, but not really anything official kind of thing, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I think I've seen him in a few things, but not that much debating. I've of course seen Bart. He's terrible, but
Yeah, I've seen him do a semi-discussion, semi-debate with Mike Lacona about it was a long time ago, but I believe it was the reliability of the Gospels, probably. But like
right,
a debate, I don't think I've ever caught. And so
right,
yeah,
right.
I'm excited for Barts and Butts.
I was interested in sort of um, whether he would translate well into a debate because so I mean, Butt is an apologist. He's definitely under the apologist category. He's not um he's I mean he's fine. It's just he's not a theologian. Like, I mean, obviously Dr. Bart Ehrman, I have the greatest respect for him. He's definitely a very, very learned individual in the way of sort of theology and biblical studies. But it's kind of it's very subtle, but they're two kind of different things, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
that apologetics isn't necessarily theology, and vice versa, of course. That I think that that theology is sort of the study of religion, while apologetics is kind of I don't know what to call it. It's the sort of arguments and promotion of religion, of a particular religion, in fact. So I don't think that they're necessarily the same thing.
I'd say that they're in a way kind of polar opposites. As Brian Dalton, Mr. Deity, put it, apologetics is more accurately described as excusegetics. And, it's theology, the way Bart does it, is more about finding the truth, whereas
Mm,
apologetics, the way Kyle does it, is more about excusing the falsehoods.
right, right. Or at least coming up with reasons as to why the falsehoods don't necessarily prove the untruth of the religion. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, which is kind of and I'm not sure how well Bart Ehrman, because we know that Kyle is very theatrical. He likes to take a grand performance. So I've never seen Dr. Ehrman really be that bombastic. He's very measured, like most academics are, very, very tenuous in his opinions and sort of give a lot of sort of qualifying statements and things like that. So it'd be interesting to see how he actually debates. Yeah, but I think I've got it organized now. Sorry. There we
It's
go.
all right.
Yeah, get it. We're still waking up. I apologize. I will wake up. I just need a kick of coffee.
Yeah,
So
I actually stopped for a coffee myself. I haven't had coffee in over a week, but I'm like,
oh,
yeah,
really?
I could use some today.
Mhm. Mm. So chat, I'm expecting you to hold up all the butt jokes. So we have this butt.
But
Ah,
wait,
boy. But wait, there's more but. More but. Yeah, and I snapped every time you pause on Kyle, his face is just classic. That the thumbnail picture is just from a random stop I made on him, and it just was too good. I think that was in another debate we covered. I said I've got to get a screenshot of this because it's just too good. I'm sure everyone's the same, but just for some reason, Kyle, it just yeah, what a guy. Okay, do we have anything to cover before I start this off? Should we just kick off straight away? Is that what we're doing? Is that a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, we could always preliminary by, like, mentioning that if people want to support content like this, they can join the channel, get some lovely emojis.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. Actually, that reminds me too. I think I've got I can give memberships away. So have readerships so I don't forget. I'm not forgetting. There we go. Okay. So all the early joiners, you get readerships because you're here. I think that's how it works. So we've got 5 readerships going out to my Godhead. Yay! Pidhanjik. I don't know how to say that. I'm so sorry. What the Beck got hit. Human Girl, congratulations. And Katarina Flame, which is an amazing name, I gotta say. But enjoy your emojis. Use them. I was about to say use them wisely, but come on, who am I fooling? I mean, I don't even use them wisely. Let's face
right.
it. Yeah, I might give myself a bonk for that one. Yeah, I don't even use them wisely. So use them as unwisely as you want, quite frankly. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, that's a good idea. And I gave away all my readerships for the month, which is awesome. I'm blowing my load really early in the month, but I don't care.
You're
At least
blowing your load on the butt. Why are we like this?
I don't know, but I love it. Look, if you got to blow your load somewhere, on a butt is probably one of the best choices. So yeah.
Oh my.
It's gonna be like this all stream. I know it. That's okay. I'm here for it. I'm ready. Okay, let's listen to Kyle.
Good evening. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to thank those of you who are watching via internet. I'd like to thank the Christian Student Center of UNA. I'd like to thank Dr. Ehrman for his participation in this event. And
what's UNA?
University of North Alabama, maybe? I don't know. I'm impaired. As you know,
yeah, you're right. University. No, you're right. You're right. University of North Alabama. Wow. Okay, we're getting
good guess. Go Ember.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
Most importantly, I'd like to thank God, the all-loving, all-powerful God, whose existence I'll be defending this evening.
Why is he debating? That would be good. And I'd like to thank my
kind of clinch it.
Right. It certainly would do more than probably what the arguments that you're going to come up for, Kyle. Like if he can be your panel member or whatever.
Tonight we are discussing the idea of suffering. This idea, Dr. Ehrman says, is the idea that caused him to lose his faith in the God of the Bible. He says that he looked around the world, saw the suffering that people experienced his own suffering, and came to the conclusion that the Christian God simply does not exist. And that's why he'll be affirming this evening the pain and suffering in this world indicates that the Christian God does not exist. I'll be showing that that simply is not the case.
That's a really weird way to put it.
It's a bold claim, too.
Well, it's not really in propositional language, is it? It's kind of, he's saying, who's on the affirmative? What's the proposition for this debate? I don't know. It just says God and the suffering and the existence of God. Maybe the proposition is that suffering precludes the existence of God. But if that's the case, why is Kyle going first? Usually it is the affirmative that goes first. Yeah, I don't know. Let me just grab the original and see if Sometimes they do. Like I dislike it when they don't have a proposition, because it kind of makes things a bit weird sometimes. As far as, who is defending what and what have you. Let's have a look. The pain and suffering in the world indicate that the Christian God does not exist. Okay, so Ehrman is on the affirmative. Okay, well, that's a weird format, but sure. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, maybe. I have no idea. I'm bewildered, but that's okay. That's all right. I mean, it's just a weird format. That's okay.
I'll be showing that the pain and suffering in this world, in fact, do not indicate that the Christian God does not exist. Now, when we're talking about this idea of suffering, there have been many different approaches. Some people have approached it with very insufficient, inaccurate results. In fact, they have said suffering is something that happens in your mind. It's something that isn't real, it's illusory, and if you could just get your mind right, then you wouldn't be suffering and you wouldn't have pain.
Okay, so for a start, this is from about 8 years ago, and like I don't know, you can tell the preacher in Kyle kind of thing. He's kind of already in preach mode. So if you could get right in your mind, pain and suffering wouldn't exist. I don't think that is true.
No, I say not. There's it's probably not all Buddhists, but there are a group of Buddhists who have this concept that if you can arrange your mind in a fashion where gratitude is primary in all things, you can minimize your personal suffering by, say, you stub your toe, ow, it hurts. But then you immediately, after the reflex passes, you immediately start thinking how wonderful that I'm alive to feel that. It can reduce your suffering, but I don't think even they say you can ever eliminate it by jiggering with your thinker.
Right. Well, I mean, part of it is true that all of our experiences are a result of, the senses and the brain. So it is true to say that our reality is, we live our reality in the brain kind of thing, that all of it, and it probably is true that if say you didn't have a sense of empathy or a sense of, pain, like if you couldn't feel pain and had no sense of empathy and had no sense of you were lobotomized or something, suffering wouldn't exist for you. But that's not the reality of our world. It's not like, well, if pain and suffering doesn't exist for you, then it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, like that's not even a viable, like, take it outside of the human perspective for a minute. We know
Yes.
animals can suffer. They whimper when they're in
Sure.
pain, and they don't
Sure.
have the cognitive capability to psychologically lobotomize themselves in order to pretend that they don't. You could go even further. Many biologists have made the analogy that, when you cut grass, they release a certain hormone indicating they've been damaged. So when we smell the scent of cut grass, to
Right.
the plants, that's them screaming in pain. It's
Yeah.
probably not pain the way we think of it, but it's still a symptom of a kind of suffering. Like, every
Yeah.
living thing is capable of suffering in some fashion.
A response to trauma, yeah. And I think that I think that it's sort of it's interesting that he's sort of going for, well, I mean, it doesn't sound like he's going for it, but he's sort of I don't like the sort of thing to say, well, if you just think about it the right way, because we do run into the whole Christian perspective of, oh, everything's a test and it's actually good that God drowned babies in the flood and stuff like that. Like you run into that upon occasion. And so
I wish I had my clips. William Lane Craig's speech about killing the babies was wonderful, actually.
Yeah, and so and so I mean, you could make an argument that, oh, it's only your apparent reality within your mind that is pain and suffering. but then you'd be making the argument that everything is only in your mind. Your apparent reality, the one where a tree, you don't have direct access to it. It's just your sensory information and what's in your mind evaluating it. So you kind of, I think it's just a nonsensical statement, because you're sort of going back to, well, everything's only in your mind. Well, that's true to a certain sense, like that's true to a point. But at the point where we confirm among ourselves that that is true, then it becomes more than that. I don't, I think that if you, we were like, in one of my comments, you mentioned like tooth pain and how nightmarish it is. And I think that we can all agree that that kind of, pain is not just a mental construct. It's not, you can fool yourself into not feeling it. That is not true. I
Yes.
think that is something that, yeah.
I think you and I both can understand that when we experience our own suffering and look around at the suffering of others, we realize that's not just something in our mind. You can't dismiss it like that.
Right.
Other people have taken.
Right. Okay. So he's not angling for that. All right. Well, I have misjudged my butt. I'm sorry.
Equally inaccurate views. I debated a man by the name of Dan Barker in 2009, and he says if you go into a children's hospital and see the pain and suffering those children experience, then you know God doesn't exist. Well, that's just simply not the case. I took him up on the challenge. I went into the children's hospital there in Columbia, South Carolina, and the first person who met me was a volunteer. I asked her what she was doing there. She said,
"Oh, it's anecdote time from Butt." You don't. It's kind of crazy to start out with an anecdote, and he's referencing Dan Barker, who, maybe that was the debate that we covered. Maybe I'm not sure, but
yes, the Darwin Day debate they did.
Yeah, well, Dan Barker isn't in this debate. I don't know why he's referencing some other person. Like that will do this a lot. It would be like, me going to debate with some apologist and saying, oh, well, Kent Hovind says this. It's like, well, I would hope that you direct your, you don't just bring up random people. Maybe he's got a point to it, but it seems a little bit weird, because obviously Dan Barker isn't speaking like, well, it's impossible to believe in God if you see the pain and suffering of children. That's obviously untrue. That's not what he's saying, right? He's saying that I believe that you can't look at the pain and suffering of children and make a coherent argument that a God exists, like a benevolent God exists, because there's so much of it. I think Butt has sort of, he's reading into this a little much. He's taking it too much, he's being over literal, I think. I don't get the point of this.
He could be taking a slightly different perspective and saying that, yes, there's suffering in those children's hospitals, but that suffering makes it possible for the volunteers to volunteer, because without it, they wouldn't be necessary. And so in a way, it's actually serving some good.
Oh, that's awful. That's an awful sentiment. Suffering's great because it gives us something to do is not a good sentiment at all.
I got that one from Braxton over on Trinity Radio.
Really? Wow. They should hand in their empathy card, quite frankly, because that's awful. It kind of reminds me of sort of Munchausen by proxy kind of thing, if you know what that is. It's sort of making somebody else sick so you feel empowered because you get to take care of somebody.
That's a big oof.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the fact that we have people, it's so Munchausen's syndrome is where they sort of lie about their own illness. Munchausen by proxy is where they lie about somebody else's illness. There was a girl who was kept in a wheelchair, and I think she murdered her mother to get out of it, kind of thing. And she sort of says it was the wrong thing to do and all of this stuff, but you can sort of I don't know. It's really rough because she was basically kept in a wheelchair and told that she wasn't allowed to go out, and there was nothing wrong with her. Like it's so crazy. I don't know how you get to that point. I don't remember her name. Lynn was telling me about her.
To help as many other people as possible. And I asked her why. She bent down and showed me a bullet hole in the back of her head. She said several months prior to that, she had been sitting in her living room and a stray bullet had come through her living room wall and had struck her in the head. She said that she should have died, but she attributed her living to providential interaction from the Lord. And she said that's why she felt like she should help other people as much as possible. I said, the other volunteers.
I said, stop.
Praise the Jeebus.
Yeah, and I said, like this isn't a church, but like you're doing a debate, and this sort of is really anecdotal. It's kind of like, oh well, yeah, she had a brush with death and found God. Okay, that's not a strong argument for the existence of God. I don't know where he's going with this. I really don't.
Like I can very much relate, as you may recall, from when Beamsy told us about the time he got blown up in the Navy. I mentioned that I also got blown up in the Navy, and I didn't go into a lot of detail, but the TLDR is I should not have lived. And
Right.
so I have this perspective that like every day I get since that moment is like bonus time. And I try to use it to do good wherever possible because I have a similar feeling to that other survivor. But I'm not crediting it to any random deity who pops into my head, I'm just glad to have this time.
Yeah, and you are Victoria makes a good point. The Lord shot her and missed her vital organs. Yeah.
Oh, the Lord is a very bad shot.
and that's really what we're getting at. That's really, but it was a stray bullet, Victoria. So it who knows? So not a it was a stray bullet. Okay, so here's the problem here, that they try to frame it as suffering and evil is a good thing because it has some sort of extraneous or some sort of externality that is good. Like, for instance, a person goes on to find the Lord and do good things, for example, in his example. But there's sort of this problem with true suffering that, we can sort of, and I do agree, you can sort of find a silver lining or something good to come out of a bad thing. But it's really important that we don't start to say, hey, being shot in the head is a good thing if you go on to do this stuff. It's the event itself is not a good. Yeah, sorry, Amber, go ahead.
It's all right. There's also a matter of the survivor perspective, right? Like, if the bullet had gone, a quarter of an inch to the left and killed her, she wouldn't be there to tell that story. So there's all these people who suffer and don't make it. And how do we account for that?
Well, that's where sort of God works in mysterious ways, and you've just got to, have faith that they know what they're doing and that there was some kind of intentionality. I don't know. That's the thing. It's sort of this, well, that's good because these things happen, but even if they don't happen, then it's, it's still good. We just don't know how. And I find that very lacking. Or it's good because this thing happened, but I'm not going to count it against it if that good thing doesn't happen. So, some things are completely senseless, like 100% senseless, and are definitely not good. Yeah, the church's abuses, the Catholic Church's abuses, for instance. You may say, hey, something good came out of it that we're now sort of addressing what churches have done, but that doesn't mean the event that happened is a good thing. Like, it will never be a good thing that happened. It will not. I see the problem with sort of having this idea that it's good that something happened because through that struggle, you've gotten something good out of it. I find that very, very, I take exception to that. And I think it leads down the path of, well, Mother Teresa kind of thing. It's holy to suffer kind of stuff.
Yeah, like if that were the case, then there wouldn't be, Henrietta Lacks, the person who her cancer cells continue to live on, be the subject of study today. That wouldn't be a question for ethical studies and students in classrooms doing morality projects and whatnot, because even though she suffered and did die, her cell line live on, and in many ways that turned out to be a net good. But the original suffering that caused it was not necessary to achieve that end.
And I think I want to go back to your point, which was a fantastic one, that say all of the people that have just suffered and died and we don't know about them, how many people in history do we really know about is a tiny fraction, yet everybody has suffered. So what about them? What was the purpose of their suffering? What was the purpose of the suffering for the hundreds of thousands of years before we had religion? What was the point of animal suffering? No one's going to remember that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of gets right back to what we were saying in the beginning. Bart Ehrman can point at, a 2-month-old baby dying of leukemia and says, how could that possibly be a good thing? This contradicts your idea. Whereas Kyle can turn around, and as long as he can come up with an excuse, then he feels justified in continuing to believe.
Yeah. No, that's 100% fair. And I'd like to see his response to it, to be honest with you, because it sounds like he's going to go into it, because he's talking about Barker. He really did get thrashed in that Barker debate. He sounds like it's weighing on his mind a little, because he seems to be rebutting the great Dan Barker. And, I don't know what kind of introduction that is.
You should have called this debate dissection rebutting.
Nice.
In this particular children's hospital, would you say that they believe in God? And she said, oh, far and away, yes, most all of them do. You see, it's simply not the case that if you were to go into any children's hospital, you would just come away somehow knowing that the Christian God does not exist. So what are we dealing with then?
Yeah, he's being hyper literal for that argument. Dan Barker's trying to say, hey, if you are rational and you want to apply that God is all good, you can't go into a children's hospital and come out saying that God is all good. And it's sort of a prescriptive thing. Like, I don't think he meant it absolutely that's what happens. So I don't know what his point is.
Yeah, and it's really weird saying that, let's just suppose for the sake of argument, Kyle isn't just making this up, and 100% of the children there were believers. That doesn't mean that God doing that to them on purpose is a good being. Like, these are scared children who are terrified of death, and they've been, talking to their parents and the staff and the chaplains and saying, what's going to happen to me? And they keep being reassured, as long as you believe in Jesus, even if you die, you'll still be fine.
Yeah. It's a very weird argument to take where, and plus I noticed I can't see Dan Barker anywhere around, so I'm not sure why he's talking about him at all, quite frankly.
Yeah.
No. Well, historically, the idea or the problem of suffering has been put like this. If there is an all-loving God, and that God is all-powerful, then why do we have suffering?
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah. So the problem of evil, it's a little bit more nuanced, but it is, if a God is all good and a God is omnipotent, so a God is has the capacity to only have good happen in our reality, and it only wants there to be good in our reality, then why does evil happen in our reality? That's essentially it. Because the whole point is that everything that happens in our reality is a product of God's planning. It is unfolding as God wants it to. So either God does not want everything to be good, or God does not have the power for everything to be good. And that those two statements don't mesh up with the classical God of classical theism. And it's a big problem. And sort of a lot of theists will go, oh, well, it's because of the fall. It's human intervention kind of thing.
Because we're more
that
powerful than God.
Well, there's a free will argument that comes out. We have to have free will to do whatever we want, but so then people will do whatever they want, kind of thing. And they will hurt each other and cause suffering. But it doesn't address the non-human suffering. Like, for instance, why do volcanoes kill people and hurt families? Why do earthquakes have houses collapse on people? Things that are under the purview of not will at all. It's just natural events, presumably according to the plan of God. There's things like, why do viruses that harm us exist? Like God must have created those with the purpose of causing us incredible harm. Because don't forget, you can't say, hey, a virus is just doing what a virus does. Like we can in a sort of more secular or atheistic world. We can sort of say, hey, a virus is just being a virus. It's just trying to survive, and it doesn't mean to hurt us. It just is trying to use our resources, because that's what a virus does. A theist can't say that, because everything is centered around people. So God created viruses. Viruses seem to have the outcome of doing incredible damage to us, like causing real suffering. I mean, real suffering. So it doesn't get around that free will problem. And that's where the sort of rubber meets the road. There's all this stuff happening that humans don't choose. No human has chosen to happen. So you can't get around it with free will. I have a left-handed Jedi. Happy May the 4th, left-handed Jedi. Happy May the 4th, because
May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with. It's 5th here, but you're all the right way up. So I'm the one upside down. And who got hit? Lunar Regolith Phantasmal Terrain. That is one amazing name. And that was rhyme. I didn't mean to, but there you go. Has a readership. Beamsy has a readership. Aussie Gold has a readership. Professor Phil Bell, congratulations, mate. You got a readership. And John Fopiano has a readership. Winners all. Winner, chicken dinner. Use your emotes irresponsibly, as always, as irresponsibly as humanly possible.
In accord with free will.
In accord with free will. Readership, yeah. Well, I actually, I gotta admit, I kind of ripped off Ember completely, because they were calling theirs Emberships, and I thought that was freaking amazing. So it's a readership now. Yeah.
Gotta have fun with it.
Yeah, I just flagrantly plagiarized Ember for that idea. I've got to be honest with you. There's no innovation in that one. I absolutely copied Ember. Yeah. But I mean, you're a trendsetter. What can I say?
I'm making a real difference in the world.
Oh yeah. Well, look, I value your friendship. You've certainly made a difference in my world. We've got to stop thinking if we don't change the world, and be, say, Neil deGrasse Tyson, that we're not making any difference. I think it's the small things that we've got to pay attention to. Sort of just being a good person and trying to make the world, or just, doing what we can, because we're very, very small parts of the world. I get that. But just little ways. Try to help your friends. Try to help those around you. Be
Oh, for
kind.
sure.
It's very small,
The,
but significant.
the actions we take, the things we do, they ripple outward and have consequences far beyond what we ever could have intended. I was reminded of that today at the wedding I was at, uh, because the bride and groom I know from the Comic Con I run, and there's so many people that were there because, in a roundabout sort of way, of my interaction with those people, because I brought them into the Comic Con, and because that experience worked so well, they started getting involved in other conventions, and
Nice.
it's been a huge boon to their business, and they've met so many other wonderful people, and that's many of the guests were some of those wonderful people. And
Mm,
even though it was a small thing and I didn't intend for any of that to happen, it kind of shifted the trajectory of their lives in a very meaningful way. And I thought
mm.
that was pretty damn cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I don't know. There's something about weddings that are just wonderful. Just sort of, I guess they're just sort of a celebration of love and stuff. And there's not enough love in the world. I'm gonna get all lovey-dovey for a second. Like this is the thing. We really, and I think it is the whole idea of having communities and helping one another through this suffering, because like name one person that hasn't suffered. It's impossible. Everybody suffers during their life. It seems unavoidable, and um, it's the connections we make through going through those hard times and truly suffering that are meaningful. I think there's something to that's the reason why humans have excelled. That's the reason why we have overcome so much, is because we form these groups that support each other. And I think that's not trivial.
That's
But
arguably our greatest strength as a species.
sure, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's not even our intelligence or tool making. A human by themselves is still insanely vulnerable, no matter, you can have modern survival equipment. And if you're alone, you are incredibly more vulnerable than even if you just have one more person there. We are very, very bad alone, like terrible alone. People go out to do survival stuff alone, but they don't live their lives like that ordinarily. I don't think that's a natural way for a human to live, to be honest with you.
Well, there's the occasional hermit who seems to enjoy it, but yeah, I
True.
mean, like, shit happens. If you have a cabin in
Mm.
the woods and a storm comes and a tree falls down on your cabin and blocks the door,
Yeah.
you're kind of stuck until the villagers come to check on you.
Yeah.
You see, the idea is if God is all loving, he wouldn't want us to suffer. If he's all powerful, then he would have the ability to stop suffering. And yet there is suffering. Now, lots of times this has been presented as logical proof that the God of the Bible does not exist. In fact, there's an unbeliever by the name of J.L. Mackie who several years ago said, yes, this argument is so very strong that it logically disproves God's existence.
Does it logically disprove God's existence?
I don't think so. I think it renders the claims about the Christian flavor of God to be
Yeah.
contradictory in some fashions, but it doesn't prove that there's no God or even there's no Christian God, just that the claims being made cannot be true.
Well, as we've seen, there is an out as well, because you mentioned William Lane Craig earlier, and he's like, babies dying in the flood is a good thing, right? So there's the out that if you say, hey, that's suffering, it seems like suffering for us, but in reality, it is a good thing. There's your out, right? That's the out from your God.
Nah, I don't buy that because it's circular. It's begging the question, because in
What do
order
you
to
mean?
make that argument, you have to start by asserting your conclusion that everything God does is good. So since that's your foundational premise and also your conclusion, that makes it circular.
Well, no, it's fine in it's not really circular because in the format of the syllogism, it does, like, because when you say logically disprove, you're basically saying, hey, the syllogism is not valid, right? It's not a valid, not soundness, so it's not whether you've got proof of it or not. It's whether the syllogism makes sense. So there's no problem with a syllogism that says this kind of stuff up front, begging the question, or you know, it may be begging the question, but that's soundness, not validity, which isn't sort of a logical thing. So if you're saying, hey, it God is all, because you can start with God in a syllogism. It's just, that's fine, because the syllogism only works if that God exists, and then you've got the problem of proving that God exists for that syllogism to work. So if you say, hey, God is all benevolent, God is all powerful, if a God is all benevolent and all powerful, then they wouldn't want suffering to exist. Suffering exists, therefore the God does not exist. That's essentially the syllogism boiled down. But when you're sort of saying, and so sorry, bear with me, Amber, because I will get to the point. I realize I'm taking this in sort of very, very circular, but what you're saying is that suffering doesn't necessarily equal bad, right? So benevolent means good, right? So if you take the Mother Teresa out and say suffering is good, right? You've avoided the contradiction there, and it's not circular.
Well, I suppose if you remove the normal premises, like in William Lane Craig's case, it's suffering is good because God cannot cause something that isn't good, and God causes suffering, therefore suffering
I
is
see
good.
what you mean. I see what you mean.
But a
Yeah,
Mother
no,
Teresa
that's
perspective,
circular, sure.
that you're just removing God and all of that from the equation and just straight up asserting suffering is good. And I'd challenge that. I'd say I don't agree with that, but in and of itself is not inherently illogical.
Right, it's not illogical. And I think the argument's being made that good things can come from suffering, right? So therefore the
Sure, but that
suffering is
doesn't make
good.
this. But bad things come
Right,
from suffering too. So
correct,
then we're in
yes.
the Ray Comfort paradigm. If you lie
Right,
once, does that make you nothing but a liar? If you do one good thing, does that make everything you've ever done completely good?
right. So I think you've got massive problems with the premises, right? So the soundness of whether the premises are actually true. But I don't think it logically disproves that God. And the out is, if you're if you're provisioning that logic on suffering is a good thing, then you can get around that idea that God causes suffering and therefore causes evil. But then you've got to take the position, well, suffering is a good thing. And I think that's a very, very difficult position to take, because, it's kind of like, well, why try to stop suffering then? Why do we try and stop this suffering if it is a good thing? If it
Why were we created to suffer from suffering when it's beneficial? Shouldn't we enjoy it?
Right, exactly. Big shout out all the BDSM people out there. But
Giggity,
look,
giggity.
giggity, absolutely. But the whole point is that you would then have to say, hey, all of these things are in fact good, and more to the point, if they are good, then we should be promoting them and not stopping them. So all of that natural stuff like viruses and things, why should we try and combat that if it's a good thing that was provided by God to be good? You've got a massive problem now. You've got a massive problem with your sort of intellectual consistency. You're saying that, viruses that cause us to get sick and suffer unbearably in tormented pain is a good thing, but you're trying to stop it. There's a problem there.
Yep.
So yeah, he's not like, I don't know who he's referring to here. I don't think it necessarily disproves, but if you want to say that suffering is evil, then yes, it does logically disprove the God of the Bible. Because if suffering is evil, then God is definitely causing evil when he has the power to not do that, and he has the power, he has the will, or he wants that not to happen.
Yeah. Job. It's in the Bible. Therefore, the God of the Bible is culpable for those actions. And that absolutely did not have to happen. That was
Right.
God just fucking around.
Yeah, that was God testing to see whether someone would hate him when he is a complete dick to them, which is just unfathomably weird. And I don't get why everybody blame, like the Christians blame the devil for that one. It's so weird. And why would the devil make a bet with God when God knows everything that's going to happen? That would be like, it's like making a bet with a rigged casino, like a rigged bet. He already knows the outcome. Why would you do that? It's very strange. It's very strange.
What's worse is
Sorry, it broke up a little bit.
The devil knows that God already knows the outcome. So what is it's not.
Oh, you're breaking up a bit, Ems. Are you near Wi-Fi or something like that? You're really breaking up.
I'm kind of sort of near a military base. I don't know how good the signal is right here, but yeah, I'll chill for a minute and it should come back in a few more miles.
Okay.
Said just like A is greater than B and B is greater than C, therefore A is greater than C, you can take these three ideas that there's an all-loving God who is all-powerful and that there is suffering, and you can logically disprove God's existence. Now, that happened to be an epic failure. In fact, he had to come out several years later.
Okay, so all you budding debaters out there, keep track. Ehrman's making notes, and I 100% support this. If you're not making notes in a debate, I think that you are doing yourself a disservice. You think you're going to remember everything that's said and everything that goes over. You never, or I never can. And I know very few people that can sort of step into a debate. And you'll see it over and over with these debaters that we have. They will be making notes. Christopher Hitchens will be making notes. Everyone will be making notes. If you want to debate, get into the habit of doing that, because it's fine to think that you're going to remember everything, even if it doesn't. For me, it just helps solidify what it is that I'm thinking about, where I want to go. I support this behavior. I really do. I think it sort of, we don't promote enough of taking of notes when we really have to address something very quickly. I think that it's incredibly helpful. And it's really weird just how much, I have probably about 5 or 6 notepads just filled with notes beside me. It's actually pretty insane, but it's definitely served me well. If you're wondering how I jumped into debate and did so well up front, it's because I take notes, really. I mean, a few other things, but taking notes.
Yeah, it certainly helps. My computer desk, I've got stacks of used envelopes. I recycle them before I put them in the recycling. But I don't even debate nearly as much as you do, and I've still got tons of notes all over my desk.
My down under tactics. Thanks, Luna. I appreciate it. It's
getting down and dirty.
It's a great emu war tactics. That's what it is. Yeah.
And say, no, you can't do that. In fact, let me read to you what he said. He said, and I quote, "We can concede that the problem of evil does not, after all, show that the central doctrines of theism are logically inconsistent with one another. Now, Dr. Ehrman knows that this is the case. When we were writing emails back and forth about the proposition, I asked him, would you affirm the pain and suffering in this world proves that the Christian God does not exist? And he said, no, you can't do that. The pain and suffering in this world does not prove that the Christian God does not exist. Now, that came as a blow for unbelief.
Yeah, and probably he's probably thinking the same way that I am. It doesn't necessarily prove it, but there's a few entailments to that that you have to follow. And plus, you know, when you're talking to an academic about does it prove this, that is a stretch, because you know what I want to point out in this is he first started off saying, oh, that guy before said it proves logically that the Christian God of the Bible does not exist. Notice he switched to Bart Ehrman says that it doesn't prove that a God doesn't exist. Those are two very different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you want to say, does it prove that a God doesn't exist? If that God isn't omnibenevolent and that God isn't omniscient, so it's unaware that suffering's going on somewhere, it has to be omniscient as well, and it has to be omnipotent to be able to stop it, right? So if those three things aren't correct, then the problem of evil isn't a problem. It isn't.
Yeah, that's why the ancient theists had little difficulty. Like the gods were super powerful compared to humans, but still limited. They weren't able to control everything, and their personification characteristics almost universally included whim and often a streak of cruelty. And that suited what the human experience very, very well.
Yeah.
It matched observation.
Yeah, I think that he's using somebody else's. I think that he's misrepresenting Bart Ehrman here. It'd be interesting to you know, I know we can't, but to hear the actual conversation, whether he said, does it prove that the Christian God doesn't exist, or the God of the Bible, or the God of classical theism, for instance, with a triomni God. Like what God doesn't logically prove that it exists? Because no one is saying that it disproves all gods. No one's saying that about the problem of evil. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm curious about the premise of the debate. If, you know, in Kyle's opening, he's including Bart stating that doesn't disprove your God, then what are we talking about tonight?
Well, the proposition is the pain and suffering in the world indicates that the Christian God does not exist. So he doesn't need to come up with some kind of proof, right? Like, that isn't what he needs to do. Bart Ehrman, I mean. He needs to just show that it indicates that the God does not exist. And I must say, it's the Christian God specifically, not any God. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Kyle's doing a bit of I think we've got a bit of a dirty butt on our hands here. He's being a bit he's being a bit sort of taking Bart Ehrman saying, hey, it doesn't disprove a God, which is true, to but he's using, do you see how he's comparing it to the other guy who's saying, hey, the problem of evil logically disproves the Christian God specifically, and then saying, oh, Bart Ehrman said generally it doesn't. You know, he's trying to do a false equivocation between the two, and it's not the same thing.
Word games. Where's Uncle Bobby? We got to send Kyle to the kiddie table.
Yes. Very dirty butt.
Because there are arguments that, if logically valid and sound, would prove that God, the Christian God, does exist. For instance, the moral argument. The moral argument says if there are objective moral values.
Yeah, I'd look at the look on Lisa. Why is he going to other arguments? We're talking about suffering. You know what I mean? Like, wait, he's now going into arguments for God, but it's not related to pain and suffering. So he's given an anecdote, misrepresented what Bart Ehrman said, and now he's going to the moral argument for God. I guess it's tangentially related, but it is a weird pivot. Sort of a you know, like maybe a red herring. I mean, I would like to see Kyle tie it back into pain and suffering.
Well, maybe he will.
Maybe he will. Yeah, that's true. I don't have high hopes, Ems. I'm sorry.
I agree.
I'm very critical of my butt. I really am.
We all have to worry about, the shape and size and the bounce factor and all those other things. But my thoughts on the moral
Overhang.
argument. I think it's pretty damn weak. And
yeah, well, yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Bart could dismiss this with a wave, and he could get a good hitch lap in too, depending on how it's presented. But he could just say this is irrelevant to the topic of the evening and just be done with it.
Right. Because no matter where our morality comes from, or even if we make it up, it doesn't preclude suffering. It doesn't. I'll have to see how Kyle ties it in, but that doesn't preclude any suffering. And why have morals where, as you quite rightly pointed out, Ems, that God could have made suffering to be something we like? Then it wouldn't really matter. Yeah.
Then God exists. There are objective moral values, therefore God exists. Or the teleological argument, or the argument from design. It says that when you see complex functionality.
That was a very, very quick pass over the moral argument.
Yeah.
That isn't even really the moral argument. And you haven't shown objective, so maybe that's a valid syllogism. Like, if there are objective moral values, then a God exists. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, there's a lot of hidden premises you'd have to read into that, but I think he fucked it up. I think he may have accidentally, even though it was super brief, the way he phrased it, the first thing that popped into my head is the Ten Commandments. Maybe because we referenced Ray Comfort earlier. If God was in control of suffering, and suffering was a good, and the Ten Commandments and the other commandments are all very, very important to God, then should not the violation of a commandment cause suffering as a means of enforcing the commandment?
And yes, it should, especially because the Bible says that the wages of sin are death. Like, it should be that if you violate a commandment to a major degree, willingly and knowingly, the death should follow. But it doesn't. There's plenty of people that do, and nothing happens to them. It seems to be humans going about and sort of causing the people who have violated our moral standards to be held to task.
Yeah, and remember, this God, again, going back to the Bible, he, right after the priesthood was commissioned in amongst the ancient Israelites, our Aaron, was given the Urim and Thummim and the special breastplate and all of that crap, and they set up the first tent of meeting. I think it may have even been the very first ritual they carried out in the tent of meeting. A couple of the new junior priests fucked up the ritual. They grabbed the wrong incense, and instantly Yahweh smote them dead.
Right.
Like, he did not fuck around with enforcing even the most minor commandments. And yet we don't see that today. So what gives?
No. I don't know. I want to hear that syllogism again, because he went over that very fast.
There are objective moral values, therefore God exists. Or the teleological argument.
I do apologize. I really want to.
For unbelief, because there are arguments that, if logically valid and sound, would prove that God, the Christian God, does exist. For instance, the moral argument. The moral argument says if there are objective moral values, then God exists. There are objective moral values, therefore God exists.
Okay, that is... sorry, just 1 second. I'm sorry. Left-handed Jedi for $2. Thank you so much. Does this argument make my butt look big? No, it makes your This is going to go on all night, and Left-handed Jedi, I'm here for it. I love it. I absolutely love it.
1,000%.
These arguments make your butt... Well, I don't know if it's your butt, but they make a butt look very small. So here's the thing. As a syllogism goes, if objective moral values exist, then there is a God. Well, you've got a problem there. You're basically affirming the consequent, right? So you're basically saying that so what you're basically saying, if there was a God, then objective moral values exist. Objective moral values exist, therefore there is a God. Now, he kind of said it a bit differently because he's trying to say that the only place objective moral values can come is if from a God. And that's not particularly true. There can be other places objective moral values could come from. It could come from nature. It could come from some sort of other magical source. Like, he's basically trying to say that the only place that objective moral values, and that is like, he hasn't demonstrated that.
He also hasn't demonstrated there are objective moral values.
Well, yeah, that goes into the soundness. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And even before that, he said, here are these other arguments that do prove that God exists. Now, that is irrelevant to the subject of tonight's debate, but he's also wrong, because if they did prove his God existed, then everyone would be convinced. There wouldn't be any other kind of theist. They'd all be Christian. There'd be just Christians, and then a few people saying, I'm not convinced, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not the case. So they don't clearly prove what he says they prove.
And it's sort of irrelevant to the topic completely, because the topic is, does the pain and suffering in the world indicate that the Christian God does not exist? So that's got nothing to do with the topic. He's way off topic. I mean, I realize that apologists are going to apologist, but he's still way off topic. You know, he should be tying this into, does pain and suffering, suggest the existence of God or not?
Or the teleological argument, or the argument from design. It says that when you see complex functionality, there must be an intelligence behind it. The universe exhibits complex functionality, therefore there must be an intelligence behind it. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that unbelief says, oh yes, those arguments logically prove that there's a God. What I am saying is that if they're valid and they are sound, they logically prove that there's a God, and that's a debate for another time, and I can show that they are.
Then why are you bringing it up now? That's a debate for another time. It always amazes me when people make the arguments and then say, oh, but that's for another time.
Why burn time on it?
Yeah, like, why not just say, hey, there's a few other arguments, like teleological argument, they're for another debate kind of thing. Like, he actually presented the arguments. I don't know why he's presenting the arguments and then going, but I'm not going to bring those up.
I have a couple of hunches on that one. The first is that, like you suggested, it may be a red herring to try to get Bart to waste even more time rebutting an argument that he's already backed off from. Or he's doing, I don't know if there's a name for the tactic, but it's when you throw a conclusion out there and then say, we're not discussing that. It's a kind of sneaky way to pretend that you've gotten an affirmative conclusion that went unchallenged, because you backed off from it before anybody had a chance to challenge it, but it did go unchallenged.
And I've seen this happen, especially in sort of Hovind debates and things. He'll throw something out there, like the Bible, for instance, right? He'll say, oh, and the Bible says this. As soon as you go to, well, let's challenge what's in the Bible, he'll say, well, that's not what the debate's about, kind of thing. And then it looks like he's made this stunning point using the Bible that you couldn't refute, but the whole point is that he won't discuss the Bible. So I think there is a argument to be made that if you open the door in a debate by using an argument, then that, the other person should have the right to talk about it. I think that is, but it's kind of, again, we've got a pretty dirty butt here. It is a bit of it's a pretty dirty tactic to bring up something and go, but we can't talk about it in this debate. and use it as an argument.
Yeah, it's either very sloppy form. Hell, he may be stalling for time, but this is his opening, so he should have it pre-prepared.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's very hard to argue against the problem of evil. It's incredibly difficult. Like, that's why it is such a problem, and still a problem of evil, because no one's found a solution for it yet that fits very well. It's a very hard argument to overcome. I mean, that's not our problem, but
yeah,
it is a
that's
hard
true.
argument to overcome.
But what I'm saying is the singular argument that has been used by unbelief in an attempt to disprove God's existence, on almost all accounts now has been shown not to do that. It can be conceded, and has been by the unbelievers, that you just can't logically disprove God's existence. Well, so what are we dealing with here? Have we solved the problem? Well, no. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here tonight, would we? What are we dealing with then? Well, here's what we're dealing with. Instead of trying to logically disprove God's existence, unbelief now contends that while there might be a God, there's just too much suffering for us to believe that he exists. You see, we can't prove that he doesn't, unbelief contends, but it sure looks like to us that he doesn't. You see, it's not a logically sound argument. It's more of an emotional appeal. You know,
what is he trying to say right now?
It sounds straw man flavored to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he could be arguing, hey, it looks like suffering to us, but in fact, because God can see more than us, then he knows in the long run it's good. That's what it kind of sounds like angling towards for me. But then he's on very, very shaky ground with, hey, this thing that because of our limited vision we see as suffering is actually a good thing and therefore not evil. And so if you want to take that position, that's fine. But again, you'll be like William Lane Craig going, oh, well, all the babies that drowned in the flood is in fact a good thing, you know, and then have clips made about you saying that, because quite frankly, that's ridiculous.
Outrageous, even.
Oh, it's kind of shocking that a philosopher, you know, would say that.
Right, like he had to know. It's not like Alex even backed him into a corner on that one. I can only assume that his mind is slipping, and he either didn't realize how that would come off, or he knew how it would come off and did it anyway.
Yeah, that's it. It's weird.
let me show you how this emotional appeal is often presented. Dr. Ehrman often...
Is he making an emotional appeal? I don't
He
think
hasn't
so.
done anything yet.
Well, yeah, he's been sitting there, but he's sort of claiming he's making an argument for emotion. I just want to take this time. I want to say hello and welcome to all the Matters Now people. Make them feel at home, and we can have a party and watch. You know, maybe trying to understand how our butt works. An emotional appeal. It's not. It's a moral appeal, because you've got to be able to say, like, because what you're doing essentially when you're saying, hey, but that means that all of these children suffering in the flood was a good thing, right? The thing that William Lane Craig stepped into, that was a good thing. It's not an appeal to emotion. It's saying that, hey, morally it's got to be bad or good. And if you're saying that there is, like, to us it looks bad, but it is in fact a good thing, then you're saying that the suffering was good. And that's not an appeal to emotion. It's an appeal to morality, because it can't be bad if it is a good thing. Like, you know, do I want to steel man my butt?
Buns of steel.
I think I do. Yep. Time for buns of steel. Let's steel man my butt. So I think that people do make appeal to emotion. I think they do say, oh, what about all the babies, kind of thing. And that can be an appeal to emotion. But I don't think that's what Bart Ehrman or anybody else that is doing debates is doing. I think they are just, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, it can be. I mean, I've seen Scala Fiction, for instance, going, well, what about all the babies that drowned? Think about those babies just drown. That can be an appeal to emotion, sure. But I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Presents this particular appeal in his writing and in his debates by rattling off a series of statistics on suffering. I've taken these straight from his debates and writing, and here's how that goes often. In 1918, the influenza virus killed 30 million people. Are you saying that a loving God allowed that? Every 5 seconds, a child dies of starvation. That's 700 an hour. Every 1 minute, 25 people die of diseases related to unclean drinking water. Every hour, 300 people die of malaria. In the mid-1980s, a mudslide in Colombia killed 30,000 people in one night. There are genocides in Bosnia, in Rwanda, in Darfur, the Holocaust, the killing fields of Cambodia, failed marriages, homelessness, poverty. If God acts in this world, why doesn't he? Are you saying that God is allowing this? A loving God? I don't believe it for a second.
No, he's not allowing it. He intends it to happen.
Right. It's not a case of just allowing it. This is, I mean, I understand the idea of free will, and that God has to allow free will. So if you're talking about the genocides in Rwanda, or the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and things like that, you can make an argument. But like, think about the lack of water, for instance, that God gave droughts to people, and the AIDS epidemic and things that aren't people's decisions. They're not a product of free will. They're not God allowing it. They're that God created specifically those things to happen in order to do something. But I don't think it's an appeal to emotion. It's just putting into scale the amount of suffering that is being caused throughout the world by your God, apparently, according to the arguments that you've presented. So I don't think that he is making an appeal to emotion necessarily. There might be a bit of rhetoric in there, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's making an appeal to emotion, anti-appeal to emotion. Like, he's saying all these arguments are invalid because they cause an emotional response, even though that's not the point of those arguments. It's a consequence of our empathetic nature that we happen to get an emotional response, but that's not the logical purpose of invoking those things.
Yes. Yep. And it might include some rhetoric of showing how large the amount of suffering in the world is, but I think that's perfectly valid. I think that is valid to say, hey, it's not just stubbing of our toe occasionally. It is real gratuitous suffering, real evil and horrible things that are happening. And so that pins you into sort of like, so what I understand is it sort of pins you to say, you can't take the thing, well, suffering is good, because that kind of thing. How can you possibly say that that's a good thing? I don't think it's an appeal to emotion. I think it's just a sort of pointing out the logical contradiction in what you're saying.
Yeah, you can't discount good evidence just because it also causes an emotional reaction.
Right.
No, that's generally how the appeal is made. You see, it's not an argument. He would just like you to agree with him on some gut emotional level. Now, let me show you why this tactic simply cannot work. Because if the pain and suffering in this world argue against God, then all of the good things in this world would have to be evidence for God's existence.
No. Absolutely not. What are you talking about?
This butt is kind of slippery and slimy. He must have lubed up before the show.
Mm-hmm. This is not, because the whole point is that the suffering is in contradiction to God's omnibenevolence. Right? That's the contradiction there. that doesn't follow that if there is good, it has to be in alignment with God's omnibenevolence. That isn't even a thing. What?
And what's really sad about this is in his infamous World Video Bible School videos, where he goes over his proofs for God, he makes the same argument. Now, I'm not sure whether this debate came first or the videos came first, but in either case, he's been corrected on this point and still went ahead and made the argument again another time.
This was from 8 years ago, so I'm not sure when that came out. So it's a pretty old debate kind of thing. It definitely is an older debate. I'm not sure when the thing came out, but yeah. So if you have sort of a logical contradiction between some property and the entailment of that property, right? So there's a contradiction between the omnibenevolence and the entailment that suffering should not exist if these omnibenevolent. It doesn't mean that any evidence that doesn't meet that contradiction is evidence for it. That is not a thing. I don't know how he got to that point. It's absolutely nonsensical.
And very silly.
Yes. It's like sort of saying, if all the evidence for me stealing the bike means that I am guilty of stealing the bike, then all the people with unstolen bikes makes me innocent. No, that's not how that works.
You are guilty of not stealing so many bikes.
Right. It doesn't make sense, does it? It's sort of this very, like, I don't even know what fallacy that is. That is insane. Wow.
I don't know that one has a name because, as you know, most of the formal fallacies were laid down by Aristotle and his merry band of thinkers many years ago. I don't think anyone thought that a person would even try an argument so blatantly bullshit. So it may not have a name.
Yeah, someone's just pointed out the audio is a little off. Ember's on a new headset, but thank you for pointing that out. We're aware of it. We're doing our best. It's just a new headset, but that's okay. But thanks for letting us know. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're doing our best here. I should be home in an hour, give or take.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks for the feedback. Really appreciate it.
You see, if we could then just rattle off a series of statistics like this, then we could establish God exists through the emotional appeal. What if we were to say every single day, hundreds of millions of mothers kiss their children and tell them that they love them? Every day, millions of older people are helped across the street by younger people who gain no survival advantage from the action. Every second, 30 million grandparents.
Survival advantage? Why does it need to be a survival advantage? I don't... where did that... I feel like he's angling at evolution now. Survival advantage?
Yeah, he's very much on record as being a creationist. What is he talking about an evolutionary principle for?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. And plus, okay, so social bonding isn't a survival advantage? I think it might actually be a survival advantage.
I mean, it is, but you don't need that to help an old lady across the street. Like,
right.
As the saints used to say, kindness is its own reward. Like, you feel good for doing a good deed. That's all you really need to justify that.
Right. But I don't understand what that's got to do with the problem of suffering disproving a god, or indicating a god that doesn't exist. It's very strange. It's like that analogy that I made. Like, all of the instances of this thing not happening points to the truth of it. It's very strange. He's terrible. Like, that is a terrible argument.
Hug their grandchildren or think about them fondly every single minute. Hundreds of millions of people all around the world eat.
Okay, I see what he's doing. He's basically doing the appeal to emotion in reverse. So he's saying, hey, think about all the love out there and all of the things. That must mean a God exists. Which is a weird thing to say. So he's pointed out an appeal to emotion where it's not really an appeal to emotion. It's a statement that contains emotional triggers, but the core argument isn't an appeal to emotion. It's a contradiction between omnibenevolence and suffering. And then he's going to an appeal to emotion to sort of say, hey, but all the good things are God. It's a weird thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Good food, enjoy good, strong friendships, have good family relationships, and you're telling me that this happened because we evolved from primordial slime over multiple.
There you go. I knew it. I knew it. I
The
saw
butt
that
comes
butt
clean.
a mile off. Yeah, butt comes nice. Yep. Enter the straw man. This butt is covered in straw. Look, that is not what we're saying at all. That is a real straw man simplistic view of social bonding and its functionality in social creatures like ourselves. He's abiogenesis? It's not even evolution. It's very Hovindesque. It's very Hovindesque. Like I said, every time I pause this guy, his face is just amazing.
Millions of years? I don't believe it for a second. You see, it's an emotional appeal. Now, Dr. Ehrman understands the force of this. And let me tell you what I mean by that. In his book, God's Problem, he says, the problem I have is this. I have such a fantastic life that I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for it. I'm fortunate beyond words, but I don't have anyone to express my gratitude to. This is a deep void inside of me, a void of wanting someone to thank, and I don't see any plausible way of feeling it.
Yeah, so psychologists have talked about this, the God-shaped hole that we seem to have. We kind of want to give purpose and meaning to things that may not have any purpose or meaning. And I'm not saying definitely there's no purpose and meaning, but I'm saying that humans are generally, they try to anthropomorphize things. They try to give agency to things that have no agency. The same is true of thinking that it was a ghost that caused noises in your house rather than just natural events. We have a tendency to do this, and that's being studied. I don't think there's any question that we generally tend to do that, but that's irrelevant to the point of whether there's actually a God or not. In fact, it kind of is an argument against it, that God is man-made. You know, sort of that we sort of wanted an agent to attribute all of these nonsensical things happening around us. So a God fills that vacuum.
Yeah, in both directions. If you feel the need to thank some power for the good things that happen, then to be intellectually consistent, you should also be cursing, if not that power, some power for the bad things that happen. And that's kind of where the superstitions start building into religion in the first place.
But when those bad things come up, it's all sort of part of God's plan, and he knows the good that's going to happen. So that's the way they shore it up. But the problem with that is what I brought up earlier. That means that what is evil then? If everything evil that happens naturally, if that has a benefit and for some purpose that is good, then what is actually evil?
Yeah, what is the point of his vaunted hypothetical objective morality shouldn't we all be doing the very worst to each other we possibly can in order to cause even more greater good in the long run?
I don't know. But that's sort of, where religion is kind of very weird, where it sort of says, oh, well, good things are God doing good, the bad things are God doing good. It's a little bit weird to me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You see, to say I'm thankful for something without saying I'm thankful to someone is ultimately a meaningless exercise. And therefore, if such an emotional appeal were the way to arrive at the truth here, all we would need to show is Dr. Ehrman's fantastic life and his deep void of gratitude, and that would be the evidence we would need to show that a loving God does exist.
No, that doesn't
No.
follow at all.
No, it doesn't. Just because we want someone to thank, or there seems to be a tendency to
So let's apply our minds to this idea.
I did not mean to do that. I'm sorry, my spacebar got out of control. Just because I had a tendency to think that someone rather than something, it doesn't make it true. Like, it's almost like he's using Bart Ehrman saying, hey, I feel like I should thank someone for this rather than something, as evidence, which is weird.
It's very weird. What he said in a sentence or two back, not having someone to thank renders it meaningless. Well, no, it has a tremendous amount of meaning, because it has meaning to Bart. It helps him conceptualize his life in a framework of gratitude, which lowers stress, increases mood, makes him far more likely to help other people. There's a tremendous amount of benefits.
Yeah. And I think practicing gratitude is a good thing. Psychologically speaking, having gratitude for all the good things is a good thing. It's so that we don't just dwell on the bad things that happen, which, let's face it, we all have a tendency to do. We really do. I think I was watching a comedian from England. I can't remember his name. Jimmy... I can't remember his name, but he was sort of saying, if you think about it, nobody past the last 100 years or so had ever had a hot shower, right? Like, that is something that nobody ever had. So he tries to have gratitude. Jimmy Carr, thank you, Simos, really appreciate it, mate. Jimmy Carr, that have gratitude over, hey, I've got this thing that 99.9% of people in history have never had access to. And that's important, that we understand where we should have gratitude in life. But that doesn't make it not suffering, right? That doesn't make the suffering vanish. Let's be real here. The suffering still exists. And just because suffering and an omnibenevolent God is at odds doesn't mean that having gratitude for good things mean there has to be a God. That doesn't follow at all.
My kids still laugh at me occasionally, because one time their mom's house was right across the street from a grocery store. So when I went to pick them up for the weekend, we went to the grocery store first, and I said, you can get any snack you like. And they all went to the produce section to get fruit, and I was super proud of them. But I was just looking around while they were picking out their thing. And, it's the middle of winter, and there's apples, and there's grapes, and there's strawberries, and there's bananas, and there's plums, and there's pears, and there's peaches, and all sorts of things. And I'm like, take a second and think about this. This is marvelous. This is magical, that these wonders humans have done, where every corner grocery store has an abundance of out-of-season fruits and veggies of all kinds. This is fucking amazing. And people, a few hundred years ago did not have that either. And we should appreciate that. That's wonderful. It's relatively cheap too. It's crazy. But we did that. Humans collectively. It took hundreds of thousands of thousands of years to do that.
Hmm.
Where was God? Why didn't he just
Yeah.
snap his fingers and make that happen?
And sort of I pointed out before, like the miracle, and I use that term very, very sort of euphemistically, the miracle of science, where we're on opposite sides of the planet, discussing ideas and talking to one another through the internet, using light to communicate and having these ideas and talking with all of you. It's incredible. But I really want to highlight this. It's sort of like um so the argument that he's using is just say a father is abusive and beats his children kind of thing. You can say, hey, the idea that you are a loving father and that you beat your children, that's a contradiction and is logical. It's the same as a God is omnibenevolent and there is suffering, right? That's the contradiction. It's like if Butt turned around and said, hey, the fact that the father does nice things like buy them ice cream means that he is a loving. It's like, no, that's not the case. Like, you can't just weigh that out kind of thing with that.
Yeah. Like the one thing doesn't negate the other when the claim is all loving, all benevolent.
Right. Yeah.
You see, when we do, we see that there are several reasons why disbelief in God simply cannot be the answer to the idea of suffering. Number one, disbelief in God is forced to deny that there's any justice and fairness objectively in this world.
Did he start as a preacher? I feel like he started as a preacher. I feel like that is true. He talks too much like the preacher of God. I feel like he did.
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked up his history, but I think he was one of those preachers who, the way he preached, it seemed a little more logical, a little more sensical than most of the other preachers in the area. So other pastors would ask him to come to their church and speak, and eventually he got bigger and bigger. And this was before Jim Warner Wallace and all these other gimmick apologists. He was just good at preaching, and it kind of blended into apologetics, and so he kind of built a name for it.
Yeah. I feel like his he just wants to go to preaching. That's what I feel like. But it's just something about the candor that he has, or the style that he's presenting. It screams preacher trying to debate to me.
Well, also the Southern accent probably doesn't help, because a lot of these creation-y types are New Independent Fundamental Baptists. And the Baptist way of preaching is very tonal. It's, and God did say, and God came down and handed the tablets to Moses, and all that crap.
And number two, unbelief is forced to deny that there is an afterlife. Now, let's turn our...
No, that's not true. Unbelief in anything supernatural. So naturalism, maybe, yes, maybe. Materialism, maybe, sure, yeah. Unbelief, I hate the word unbelief. It's such a disbelief in a God. Like, I don't know, why do they use unbelief? The antonym is disbelief. Like, there's no unbelief. It's such a weird word. I dislike that they use it. It's just so stupid. There's already a word for it. It's disbelief.
Well, it's also
God,
the creationist tendency to use their own unique words for things.
Oh, no, it's weird. It's just weird. There's already a word for that. Anyway, it's not like I've got a really big problem with it. It's just, the word exists. It's disbelief. But anyway, disbelief in a God doesn't mean you disbelieve in any afterlife, because you could believe in reincarnation without believing in a God, or believe that our spirits inhabit spiritual bodies without believing that a God controls it all. You don't have to believe in a God to believe in an afterlife. So that is actually untrue.
Yeah, and even then, disbelieving isn't the same as saying the thing is not. Like, we're not saying there is for sure no heaven. We're saying we aren't convinced there is one.
Yeah, no, I acknowledge that, yes. Or I'd put that more loosely, like I'm not convinced there is an afterlife, maybe. That make more sense?
Yeah.
Because it applies to all of them, really.
Attention to that first idea, the idea of justice and fairness. After looking at the suffering in this world, Dr. Ehrman said this, and I quote, "I was at a point in my life where I was starting to have serious doubts about my faith because of my sense of fairness, of unfairness, and injustice in the world, the problem of suffering." But hold on just a second. Where would a sense of unfairness and justice come from?
Oh, for fuck's sake. Sorry, I just, he's now going to say, hey, morality comes from God. So where does the sense of injustice and unfairness comes from? Social creatures have that sense. It's called reciprocity and empathy, right? So if we, and this is studied in things like capuchin monkeys and stuff like that. It definitely is. Like, if you give two different treats to a monkey for the same work, the one with the worst treat is going to get upset. If you reward one monkey and not the other, he gets upset. And sometimes the other monkey gets upset. Like, it isn't, this sense of unfairness, it is common in all social creatures. It just is.
Oh, yeah.
It's
we've
how we
seen
survive.
rats. The smallest brained mammals that we typically study. One will solve a maze and get the reward, and then the other comes in second and doesn't get a reward. The first rat, assuming it's well fed and healthy and doesn't have any particular needs that need fulfilling by keeping the reward, will sometimes share the reward.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to do that, but
Yep.
even a fucking rat has a sense of justice and fair play.
Yeah.
If we are evolved primordial slime here by chance processes over multiplied millions of years. You see, the concepts of fairness and justice in a godless world simply have no reference point. But you don't have to take my word for that. Let me read to you what Ansel Adkins wrote in the Humanist magazine. He said that the
not even a little bit. Fairness only has relevance in a relative sense. Like, you can't understand fairness in an absolute position. Like, none of us live forever. That's unfair. It doesn't really track. Like, none of us live forever, so it is kind of fair, But to say, you get to live to 100 and I die at 40, that's unfair. So fairness only makes sense in terms of relative positions.
Yeah. I feel like he's going for atheists don't, and Simos called it first. I'll call it out, that you don't have real morality.
Yeah, it's weird he's going in that direction, since he already invoked the moral argument and then immediately backed off from it.
Yeah, but I feel like he's going to say, well, atheists can't have any real morality, proper morality, because there's no, it has to come from God, which is weird. And I will step into that moral ring any day of the week and challenge you to show that your morality is actually objective. Like, demonstrate that is the case. Because even if something is absolutely universal throughout humanity, doesn't mean it's objective. Just because everybody shares the same stance on something does not make it objective.
And I would be very much surprised if we came up with anything that all humans universally agree on.
Yeah.
concepts of fairness and justice make no sense in nature. He said there are simply
What do you mean it makes no sense in nature? There's a lot of sense to social animals having fairness and justice between themselves, because it allows them to mitigate the effects of imbalance of power and selfishness. It allows them to survive better. This is my problem when obviously what is a preacher trying to debate that then go into science that they don't understand. Yeah.
biological entities doing what they must do, wanting what they must want, and getting what they can get, living by hook or crook, and then dying. Humanity is part of this. In fact, he says, and I quote,
but they don't like living by hook or crook. One of those things, like, so he's basically saying survival strategies, right? And a lot of the time when Christians and creationists see it, they're like, oh, survival strategies is just doing whatever you can to survive, competitive kind of thing, except there's a survival strategy that involves cooperative behavior.
Yeah,
social
that's why we
cohesion.
have civilizations.
Right, and it's why, sort of chimpanzees are in a troop, not solo. It's one of the strategies that is insanely effective. And we see this all the time, everything from herds of buffaloes to flocks of seagulls. Because if you work together, you are infinitely better able to survive. And that's what I was talking about with one human in the wilderness. The only reality TV that I really have watched recently, and I usually hate reality TV, but there's one that Bear Grylls does that's sort of The Island, that he puts these people on an island and they have to survive, essentially. I think part of it is set up kind of thing, but I find it interesting. And like sort of, so these survivalists sort of say, hey, if you can get together with a group, your survival chances skyrocket because you can specialize tasks. One person does this, another person does this, another person does that, and they can produce way more than just one person doing all the tasks just for themselves. There is definite survival strategies in social cohesion. And the fact that he doesn't understand that is kind of tragic.
And it's really weird that a person who, believes in the teachings of Jesus, it just goes right over his head. Like, how did you miss that? That's kind of the main part of the message, is the community should be united.
Yeah. I'm just pointing out that if he's sort of saying surviving by hook or crook, like by any means necessary, one of those means that is incredibly effective is social strategies, and morality definitely helps social strategies. So I'm not definitely saying that's where morality comes from. I'm not making that, but his sort of thing is, well, it has to come from God, because morality isn't something of evolution. Well, I would beg to differ.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you go back to the agricultural revolution, right? Like, people started trading their crops or whatever, and then inevitably you get raiders, these people who, by hook or by crook, and they start taking other people's produce and whatever.
Yeah.
And so the farmers in an area start banding together and sharing resources. If you get hit this week, the community will take care of you. And then you in turn help your neighbor when he gets hit the next week. And then eventually they start banding together and they form a militia to ward off the damn raiders already. Yeah. And then the raiders, in order to deal with the militia, have to band together. And at that point, it doesn't matter which side wins, because we've got tribes. Like, we've already gone to the seeds of society and civilization.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
And it keeps happening. Like, look at Henry Ford and the production line. It is so much more efficient to have one person doing one job over and over, then passing it to the next person to do the next job, than one person doing the entire thing by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very simple.
Now listen to me closely. This is not Kyle Butt's opinion. This is Ansel Adams, an atheist with a PhD from Emory. He says the only way to find justice in nature would be to have it inserted by a creator God.
What?
Ansel Adams, the photographer?
He said he was a PhD. Is he a PhD in...
He could have been. I don't know. I mean, he was very good. He got the first. I mean, obviously he was very good. His art still sells today, even though it's public domain. But he was so good. He got hired by the federal government to go take pictures of all the national parks for the Library of Congress, so that there'd be a catalog of what the national parks actually look like. You know. He could have been like a fine arts PhD, or he could have gotten an honorary PhD for, his work was used in so many nature conservancy efforts. I just don't know.
Adams receives an honorary Artium Doctor degree from the Harvard University and an honorary Doctor of Fine Arts degree from Yale. You dirty little butt. You
called it.
Wow. So he's using this guy who's a photographer with honorary degrees. And don't get me wrong, his photography may be amazing, but he's using him as an authority. So this is an appeal to authority in the worst way possible, because this isn't a person who has any kind of understanding. He was believed in conservatism. Wow.
Well, I'm not even sure he did. Like, I mean, he really, his work was used in that way, but I don't know that he intended it, because that was literally his job, was to take these photos of the national parks. But I'm not even sure if he was an atheist, because it didn't really come up as part of his work.
Well, I mean, of course he's not an atheist if he said that the only way you'll get justice is for a creator to insert it in there. Or was he talking about a creator as in humans?
Mount Rushmore. I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with the quote or where it comes from or any. I mean, he wasn't even a philosopher, really. Like, he would journal about his thoughts when he went to go see these breathtaking places, as he's he'd tour them for a week or so to get a feel for the place and find the best, most photogenic areas and whatnot. And so he had to have developed a deep sense of the spirit of the place, or the feel for its nature, something like that. So he did wax philosophical from time to time, but he wasn't a philosopher,
Well, I mean, that doesn't preclude him from being a philosopher, but it's a weird... But he's basically using this person as an authority. And why should he be an authority on that it has to have come from a creator? Like, he may have been a philosopher, and granted, there are a few people out there, of course, that are, for all intents and purposes, sort of philosophers, but he's just some dude. I'm so confused right now.
And on top of that statement, it doesn't say what Kyle's representing it to say. It said, if you want to insert the idea of justice into the natural world, then you need a creator God. It's not asserting that there is justice in the natural world.
Right. In fact, it's kind of suggesting that there's not.
Yeah, the squirrel running around doing his business, having a jolly old time, and then here comes an owl. Boom, dead. There's no justice in the natural world.
Right. Yeah, and I think he's conflating natural as in natural versus man-made, natural versus artificial, and natural versus supernatural. Like that, basically our sense of justice has to come from a creator God, because we've inserted our a sense of justice into the natural world, so it has to come from a god. But hold on a second. We like the way that he's speaking, that's not part of the natural world, right? Like, you know, I think the way that sort of Ansel Adams would be speaking about it is that the natural world would be, you know, the wilderness without man's involvement kind of thing. That seems to be what he's equating the natural world with. So this is so dodgy. It's quite frankly appalling. This is shocking. This is terrible. Like, this is a PhD guy. You don't make that kind of statement with honorary degrees. Like, but what are you doing? Wow.
Dirty pool, old man.
And
Watch.
some level, Dr. Ehrman absolutely understands this, and let me tell you why. In his Forster lecture,
I'm sorry. I just love the look on Ehrman's face. Dr. Ehrman understands this. Wait, what? I do? What the hell?
in September of 2008, he said this, and I quote, "Suffering comes because we live in a random, chaotic world, and sometimes we get in the way of it." Now, Dr. Ehrman and unbelief are stuck. They know that there really seem to be some things that are unfair and unjust, but they don't have any source to arrive at these concepts.
What? Like, we're saying that justice doesn't exist in nature. What?
Hey, Mark, did you know that highways don't exist in nature? Therefore, there must be a highway god?
Yeah,
it's the only way they could happen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. What are you talking about? Wow, that is so. There's no mathematics in nature, therefore God must have created mathematics. What are you talking about? There's no computer. Hey, Ember, did you know there's no computers in nature?
What?
That means there must be a computer god that created computers.
Okay, I'm convinced. Let's build a church.
Yeah. This has become like dodgy to downright flagrantly dishonest, the way he's interpreting Bart Ehrman's statements in line with his own arguments. That is so bad. Hey, Ember, did you know there's no God in nature?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. What are you talking about, Bart? Wow, I don't know.
So you see, they're not actually saying some things are unfair or unjust. What they're saying is that if there was a loving God, these things would seem unfair or unjust. But since they deny God's existence, they're forced to say that concepts such as justice and fairness just simply have no objective meaning.
There we go.
Let me read to you what Richard Dawkins.
There we go. It's not morality if it's not objective morality.
That's right.
Wow.
Speed limits don't count if they aren't handed down by God.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm right now, I'm moving from a 55 zone to a 40 zone. And therefore, there are no speed limits because it's not just one speed limit, period. It's subjective regardless of conditions.
Yeah. Well, that would be absolute speed zones, not objective.
Oh, details.
Yeah, okay. It's a sort of narrow distinction, but I get you.
In the world right now says, he says, and I quote, "This universe that we observe has precisely the properties we would expect. If there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference."
Yeah, so quoting Dawkins. Yeah, I know this is a Dawkins quote. I didn't hear who it was from, but I know it's Dawkins. And he's not wrong. You know, when we get down to the fundamental things of reality, there doesn't seem to be anything saying, hey, a wolf can't go and slaughter a whole bunch of cute bunnies. Like, it doesn't, you know, there's no sense of that being wrong or right or anything. And he's sort of again doing an argument from authority and using Dawkins of all people as the authority.
Yeah, like that. The quote is accurate. Like the meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs. Nothing stopped it. The meteor didn't care how many dinosaurs it wiped out or anything. Like it's true. The natural world does not care.
Well, God's own church wiped out tons of people, and there didn't seem any kind of moral outrage over that. So
quite so.
And yet that's simply not true, is it? Humans do have a keen sense of justice and fairness, and that's the exact opposite of what you would expect in a godless world. There really is something wrong with this world because of the sin that was introduced and the pain and suffering that followed. But unbelief is forced to say that, what suffering occurs, it's not unfair. It just happens.
No, it is unfair to us. When I say kill and eat an animal, for instance, that's unfair to us. Oh, it's unfair to the animal, but it's not unfair to us. This is the problem. You've got relative morality. It's relative to us. I don't get it.
To go back to the Crusades, which are an example of what you just mentioned. To the Crusaders, the wanton slaughter of the people occupying the Holy Land was justice. But to the people living there, it was extremely unjust. So you cannot make the argument there is in any way anything resembling objective justice.
I don't know where he's getting this. It just seems like that really tired, drawn-out argument of, well, if you don't have objective morality, you don't have morality. And it sounds almost sovereign citizen-like. If you don't have objective law, then you don't have laws. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about?
You see, when C.S. Lewis was struggling with atheism.
Oh, here we go. C.S. Lewis. It's the apologist's greatest hits. Like C.S. Lewis, he was he was philosophical, but he also was an author that wrote fantasy books. I don't understand why C.S. Lewis is this go-to of a fountain of knowledge for these people. Like it's not, he was just a writer. It would be like sort of saying, hey, Mark Twain said this. Well, yeah, some of the things that Mark Twain said were very good, but I wouldn't use him as an authority for an argument.
Well, it's worse than that, because, when Mark Twain made a satirical quip, it made sense. I have yet to see an argument C.S. Lewis put forth that actually holds up to even a minute's scrutiny. Most of his arguments are really bad.
And usually it's predicated on the existence of God. Like the argument is dependent on the existence of God, so it kind of becomes circular. And I'm sure we'll find out just in a second what that looks like as he goes on to sort of say, C.S. Lewis.
He ran into this problem. He faced it head on. And here's what he said about it. He said, of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying that it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying that the world really was unjust, not just that it didn't happen to please my private fancy.
But it's not your private fancy. Like, our sense of justice is intersubjective. It's shared between us. Like, you're looking at justice as being your personal opinion, and it's not. It's a society's thing. It is a code of conduct for that society, and justice is the rectification or the consequences of infringing upon that code. That's what it is. Like, no one's saying, hey, it's
there's an internal consistency problem with Kyle's theology. Like, it's a key tenet in the story of the Bible and God and all that the reason God can know what is objectively just is because he has the power of discernment of good from evil. And the whole thing with the fall of man that introduced sin into the world and whatever that Kyle just invoked is dependent on humans also gaining that power. So we have the ability to discern good from evil, just from unjust ourselves without
Right.
God's input, if Kyle's story is correct.
Yeah. But then if Kyle's story is correct, then he wins the debate. So, yeah.
Well, that's why what I mean, how it's an internal consistency problem. Because if Kyle's story is correct, then we can determine good from evil without a need for God. And so if he's right, he's also wrong.
Well, I think he's sort of saying that not that we need God ongoing to determine good from evil, but that good and evil was originally like the what is good and what is evil comes from God's nature. And so you can make the argument that that fruit of good and evil is a reflection of God's nature.
That'd be a bit of a reach. He could make the argument.
Yeah.
I'd rebut that, but.
Okay,
but.
You'd rebut him, yes.
Yes.
I'm so glad he has such a funny name because he really annoys me. It poor guy. He's probably put up with it all his life, poor guy. Maybe that's why he's, so dodgy.
Maybe that's why he has such an interesting sense of justice.
Maybe.
Justice and fairness demand the existence of God. Unbelief's not arguing that the world's not fair. Unbelief is arguing that there's no such thing as fairness. Yet in our heart of hearts, we know.
No, reciprocity is a thing. It's a thing. It's a sense that we have of things being equal and just. That's a thing. We don't say that doesn't exist. It does.
Yeah, like Laplace famously said, it's not he could make the case that the Earth couldn't be a sphere without God, or what the fuck ever, and Laplace would just say we have no need for that hypothesis. We can explain this. We can make novel predictions based on this model, test them, and confirm them, all without ever positing there must be a God in there somewhere.
Right. I don't. Yeah. It's so. Every time I pause, this man. Every time I pause. Oh boy.
We know
it's a gift.
That it's the very.
It is.
Concepts of fairness and justice that make us struggle with suffering. You see, if there really is something that's fair, and if there really is something that's just, if those are objective values demand that God exist. Justice does exist.
No, that's not true. You could. Some atheists think that morality is objective, and they appeal to natural causation, social interactions, sort of. Our species being hardwired for it kind of thing. It would make it objective. It would not be stance dependent. I personally disagree, but it doesn't mean to say that if there is objective morality, it has to be a God. You have to link those two. You have to link those two, not just say, well, if objective morality exists, it has to be a God. Why does it have to be a God? Why can't it come from some kind of sort of, I hate using the word, but hardwired impulse in your brain to be able to, do these things? Why can't it be evolutionarily driven?
Sure. And on the flip side, as many have pointed out, even us in past reviews, if there is a God, its definition not objective, it's subjective, the God being the subject. You're just shifting the subjectivity one level.
That depends on a lot. Now, ordinarily, I'd agree with you, and that gets into a whole can of worms over whether God decides what is moral or whether he conveys what is moral. Kyle made an appeal to God's nature, right? It's God's nature that he's drawing upon. So that may be objective. However, that's got problems. Because if you're saying God's nature is objective, it means that God has no control over his nature, right? I have control over my nature. I can work at being a better person. That makes me more powerful than God. you've got a problem there.
Yeah. I mean, we already know you're more moral than God.
And if something was moral back in the time of slavery in the Bible, or the killing off all the Amalekites, if it was moral back then and not moral now, that means that God's nature changed somehow, and God had no control over it. It's really weird sort of statement to say morality comes from God, because morality has changed. We can all agree on that, right? Morality's changed. If God wanted that morality to change, then it's subjective, because it's his stance that is changing it. If it's God nature and God nature's changed and he didn't necessarily want it to, then God is a victim of circumstance changing his nature, which is crazy, because that would imply a lack of agency that's astounding.
Well, I'm reminded of Bill Craig's discussion with Alex O'Connor again, because even though Bill didn't come out and say it, he got one step away from it, and I was waiting for Alex to pounce on it, but he got distracted by the dead babies thing, where Bill, the TLDR is the reason God needed the Israelites to do the killing instead of doing it himself, is because God can't do something outside of his nature, but he can order humans to do something outside of his nature. That's why he needs humans to be sinful. That's why he needed the Israelites to do the genocides, because he couldn't do it himself.
Yeah, but that's bullshit, because he drowned the entire world. Like, of course he can do that.
Hard to say. I mean, he has the
really.
power to do it.
And he has the capacity to do it as well, because he already did it. Like, he killed everybody but like 8 people.
Sure, but the justification for that at the time was that all humans were 100% corrupt all the time, even as babies. Just like now with original sin and whatnot.
Wow.
Therefore, God exists. Now, let's go to the second idea, and let's see why unbelief fails to understand suffering. Unbelief fails to understand suffering because it fails to understand the purpose of this life. You see, unbelief like that held by Dr. Ehrman says that this life is all that there is. So while you are here, you need to grab as much pleasure and enjoyment as you possibly can, because there is no afterlife. In fact, he's often on record as saying things like this. This is taken directly from his debates and writing. He said that we should order unhealthy desserts. We should drink fine wine. We should grill steaks on the grill. We should watch basketball and drink microbrewed beer. And we should try to help as many other people do the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an Epicurean thing, but sure. I mean, I don't see why. I don't think that he's sort of saying, hey, that's all you should do. But I think he's sort of saying, hey, there's no reason to deny yourself, finding pleasure in life, because it is going to end. I don't get the problem with that. But that's not saying that's all you should do.
As the great prophet Shakespeare famously said, let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die.
Yeah, sure. I don't get it.
Possible. Now, this approach only works. It only works if there is no afterlife. You see, if there is an afterlife, then the purpose of this world becomes something very different than trying to get as much pleasure as possible. The purpose then becomes to forge a character that can live with the Creator forever in the afterlife. You see, in light of an afterlife, drinking beer and single malt scotch seem rather shallow pursuits when compared to preparing for a life with the Creator. You see, a failure to grasp the real purpose of this life will certainly result in failure to understand suffering. For instance, if you were to come into my kitchen and you were to go over to one of my shelves and pick up one of the green pears that are sitting there, and you were to bite into it, you might come to me and say, Kyle, you've got a pear problem. And I would say, well, why do I have a pear problem? And you would say, well, I tried to bite into this pear and it's styrofoam. I can't eat it. This pear is useless. It's worthless. I would say, hold on just a second. I don't have a pear problem. You're misunderstanding the purpose of the pear. The purpose is for decoration, not for consumption. You see, when we are told there's a problem with suffering, it's because the purpose of this world is being misunderstood.
Okay, but then you've got to sort of say, well, it's not, the pear's good, but it's a good pear. No, it's not a good pear.
It's a fake
crappy
pear. It's a
Right,
lie.
fake
It's the
pear.
work of Satan.
God is the author of
That's
confusion
so
of
weird.
pairs only. What the hell? Because then you have to say, hey, that's not suffering, it's actually good. Or that's not, that's not a bad pair, it's actually a good pair. Yeah, and lunar regolith, you're absolutely right. It's not actually a pair, it's a decoration. Like, we wouldn't say that's a pair because it doesn't have all the properties of being a pair. So you're trying to argue that suffering isn't suffering, it's something else. Oh, what a... I'm sorry, I've had to stop it like every 2 seconds because the amount of things this guy says that's absolutely wrong is insane. It's incredible.
It's a gift.
Oh, this butt, it has a gift for the world.
Now, as we're looking at that, it's only in a world where there is no afterlife that suffering could be a problem for an all-loving, all-powerful God. If there is the possibility of a God, then there's certainly the possibility of an afterlife. And if there is an afterlife, then it could be just exactly like one first-century sufferer said. Our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory.
Those ifs are doing a lot of heavy carrying there. If there's a God, if there's a possibility of a God, then there's a possibility of an after. Like, that is doing some real sort of almost slippery slope stuff. That is, A, you haven't demonstrated a God. B, you haven't demonstrated, like, why is it? I get what he's saying. Just because something's possible doesn't mean it is. So there could be a God and no afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
What
or there
then?
could be an afterlife and no God.
Sure. I think if there's a God, wow, if there's a God, there's the possibility of an afterlife. Oof.
You see, is there a possibility that there's a God and thus an afterlife? Well, Dr. Ehrman has to admit that that's possible. In fact, he says, and I'm quoting, I think the universe is such an amazing, awe-inspiring place that at the very least it demands some humility. And I think the declaration that there can't be a God is anything but humility. That's why I continue to be an agnostic and not an atheist.
Well, just so because you don't logically exclude the possibility of God doesn't mean it exists. We can't logically exclude the possibility of a magic unicorn either. But that doesn't mean it exists. This is the thing. You're using the idea that you can't logically preclude something. Like, oh, I can't logically preclude, this person from being the murderer in a case. Therefore, he did it. No, that's not how any of that works. You have to actually show that that is the case, not just say, well, it's not logically impossible. Do you know the amount of things that are not logically impossible, especially when you're using such loose terms as divine hiddenness and able to do anything? Like, it's nonsensical.
So Dr. Ehrman admits there could be a God. And if there could be a God, then there certainly could be an afterlife. And if there could be an afterlife, then the problem of suffering is not a problem for the God of the Bible. And the Christian God does exist.
Well, yeah, Amber, you've got a bit of hang on. You've got a bit of sound coming through, Amber. I'm not sure if you're out in the wind or something, but there's a bit of feedback coming through, mate.
It probably is wind. I just got home. I will mute for a moment until I'm in a better situation here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so where was I? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, it still is a problem of evil because just because you're saying, hey, this suffering will end and you'll get this reward doesn't mean that the suffering doesn't exist. and you're sort of saying it's an all benevolent, omnibenevolent, that everything is good. So either A, you have to say that the suffering is good, or B, that God is an omnibenevolent, that God does evil things even though there's a reward at the end. You have to say one of the two. It just does not apply. Yeah.
Now, in light of an afterlife, answers to why God permits suffering would become much, much more clear. You see, it would make perfect sense that God would endow humans with the freedom to choose, and that freedom to choose could allow them to choose either correctly or incorrectly and bring about suffering in their life. We could see how a world with natural laws would allow people to forge a character that would allow them to go into the afterlife. You see, in a world where you can hear "I love you," you have to be able to hear "I hate you."
That's not, no. I don't get that. I don't get that. Just because you have a world that says, he's basically saying, hey, all of this doesn't logically preclude a God, but that's not the topic of the debate. It isn't whether suffering logically precludes a God, it's whether suffering indicates there is no God. So I think he's sort of trying to raise the level of burden of proof to Bart Ehrman to absurd levels.
In a world,
and again, something called affirming the consequent. Affirming the consequent is sort of saying, if there is a God, you would expect suffering. There's suffering, so there is a God. It's very, very strange. It's a very strange thing to get onto. I don't understand where he's really going with this, because he's kind of trying to say, oh, well, I'm ignoring the omnibenevolent part. That all of the good that God does makes up for the evil that he does. But wait, he's not omnibenevolent if he does evil. That's not possible.
Where you hear "I love you," have to be able to hear "I hate you." In a world where you can feel a warm embrace, you have to be able to feel a punch in the face. You see, a world with natural laws is exactly what we would expect.
Funny you mention that. Says the world's most punchable face.
A world that is helping us prepare for the afterlife. Now, let me introduce you to a man by the name of Bob Spurlin. Bob Spurlin, his brother was murdered. His mother died of acute leukemia. He was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. He's been on his back for 20 years. He lost his daughter, Bethany, 4 days after his diagnosis. You see, Dr. Ehrman would look at his suffering and say, an all-loving, all-powerful God simply would not allow that. Bob Spurlin looks at his own suffering, and he says that Jesus Christ is the solution. It's preparing me for an afterlife.
What? That means his suffering was a good thing. So, you can believe that his suffering was a good thing because it prepares you for the afterlife. Sure, you can believe that. But then you've got to say, well, why should we try to help this person through their suffering? If their suffering is God preparing them for the afterlife, aren't we doing them a disservice to come in and help them? We're doing it a massive disservice. We're undermining his afterlife training, I think is what he's getting across. It is it's some kind of afterlife training. So if we go and help that individual and say, hey, we're going to treat your cancer, you're undermining his afterlife training. How dare you try to cure this person of his afflictions? How dare you undermine his suffering, which is, and this is the problem with Mother Teresa. She thought that the suffering is what is holy, what gets you a better place in heaven. And so Mother Teresa vile and horribly denied pain relieving drugs to people in palliative care because their suffering was making them better place in heaven. It gets to, these logical entailments get you to this place where suffering could be a good thing. And I don't think you can bridge that gap.
Bob Spurlin looks at his own suffering and says, it's made me stronger. It's prepared me for eternity.
Okay, so that is true. You can look at things that you've suffered through and say, hey, it's made me stronger. So this goes into dialectical thinking in psychology. And it's important to understand that because you can find a silver lining to your suffering, because you can say, hey, I got this out of it, and I am thankful I got this out of it. What we ought not to do is confuse that with that thing being good, right? The suffering is not good. The trauma that people have experienced is not good. The thing that they've gotten out of it due to their response to it is good. So we can never. Hello, Amber. You're cloned. You're cloned. Okay, cool. We should never confuse the two, because if you start to think of your suffering as a good thing because of your response to it, you got something good out of it, you may go down the track of repeating actions that will lead you to that suffering, and that's not good. We want to avoid that, avoid the suffering. It's very important to understand this, because he's framing it as in that suffering is a good thing. Sorry there, Ems. I'll continue onwards. It's good to see you. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's nice to be back at my base.
Thank you very much.
You're stimulating and interesting position that you laid out for us, and thank you all for coming here. So just curious, I've never been in northern Alabama before. How many of you are associated with the Church of Christ? Right, okay. So 3 of you didn't raise your hand.
He starts off with sort of a joke, Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
I should run. I'm in danger.
I'm in danger. Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what UNA is like. Is it UNA? UNA, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, but
I'm not familiar with the university itself, but I have been in northern Alabama.
Is it Bible-y?
It's so everybody's heard of Selma from Martin Luther King lore. It hasn't changed since the 1960s.
That's a shame.
It's pretty bad.
Okay. That's all I need to know.
How many of you consider yourselves evangelical Christians? Really? Interesting. Huh. Okay. How many of you are here to see me get creamed? Right. So it is a pleasure to be here with you, even though we have to be dealing with such an unpleasant topic. It is a painful topic. It is a topic that none of us takes lightly, because all of us suffer. We will ultimately all die. Many of us will die in pain. We all know people who have suffered. We know about people who have suffered. And it is not a pleasant topic, but it's an incredibly important topic. It's a topic that we should not take lightly. It is one of the big questions that all of us have to confront. I am not going to try and convert you to my point of view. My sense is that Kyle very much wants you to agree with him. And I don't mind if you agree with him or not. And I don't mind if you agree with me or not. This is too important of a topic for me to try and win a debate over. My goal here is not to win a debate. I love debating. I debate a lot since I was in high school, since I got married. I debate a lot.
Yeah, throw the domestic joke in there. But, I mean, he's very personable. I like him. But I don't know, he's not coming off as particularly strong opening. So here's the thing. He seems like a academic debater involved in a spectacle debate right now, because that's all that Kyle had was sort of those spectacle debate tactics, the sort of dirty slide tactics. No, it's okay. It's just, I've never seen Bart Ehrman really debate much. I must admit, but we'll see how he goes.
Yeah.
But this is not about winning a debate. Let me say that let me start saying, I know Kyle loves debate too. And the way I know Kyle loves debate is because of the strategy that he just employed. And just so you know what that is, Kyle has heard me give this debate a number of times, and he's read my book on this topic. And what he has just done is cited everything I was going to say and shown why I was wrong. That's a very nice strategy, and it's a strategy I can't employ because I don't know Kyle or his work. But
Was that just a diss? Like,
It kind of is. It's like the Dillahunty diss. Like I
right,
didn't
right.
bother to look up what this guy's videos have to say because it doesn't
Yeah.
fucking matter.
Yeah, because why would I? I mean, he's
Yeah.
inconsequential.
I will not be deterred. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I think. And, you know, maybe it'll sound more convincing from me than it sounded from him when he rebutted it. I started out as
Pre-butted.
a Bible-believing Christian.
Rebut. Yeah.
When I was in high school, I had a born-again experience and committed my life to Christ as my Lord and Savior.
Well, and plus, like, here's the thing. I think that Butt didn't represent him fairly, right? I don't think he steel-manned his positions, right? I think he kind of straw-manned Bart Ehrman's positions. So I think it's fine to go through it again, you know, and say, hey, this is what I meant by that. This is the context for that quote. He's taken, you know, out of context here. I think that would probably be a good thing to do. But, you know, this is his introduction, not the rebuttal period. So, you know, he may just want to stick to script, which, yeah, I can't blame him for.
And considered myself at that time as born again. After high school, I went to Moody Bible Institute for my undergraduate education, which I don't know if you know Moody Bible Institute, but it is a solid, extremely conservative evangelical school. We used to say Moody Bible Institute, where Bible is our middle name, quite literally.
Oh, that fell a bit flat. I'm not sure I need his backstory. I think that's a mistake.
I went there because I wanted to study the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, and the world's expert in Greek manuscripts happened to teach at Princeton Theological Seminary. His name was Bruce Metzger. I wanted to study with him, and so I went there. While I was there, I was the pastor of the Princeton Baptist Church for a year. Preached every Sunday morning and went to a hospital to visit people, to visit the sick. I did the regular pastoral duties that one would do, led Bible studies and prayer groups and so on. While I was in my PhD program at Princeton Theological Seminary, I started to teach at Rutgers University. At Rutgers, I mainly taught classes in the New Testament and the Old Testament, classes on the Apostle Paul, classes on the Gospel of John. I was asked one semester to teach a class that was already on the books. They wanted me to teach that was called The Problem of Suffering in the Biblical Traditions. I thought this would be a really interesting and important class to teach, because I had long thought, even at that point in my life, that the authors of the Bible are all struggling with this question of why they're suffering. The authors of the Bible did not have easy answers.
Sure, even Jesus was struggling with it. He's, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? You know, like, even I don't know who isn't struggling with why we're suffering. You know, why have I not done anything wrong, but bad stuff is still happening? It you know, like, Kyle talks about all this thing about fairness, but, you know, things happen that are grossly unfair. You know, young kids who are completely innocent, never done anything wrong, they get cancer. It's horrendous.
They would have objected to easy answers, many of them. You too should not accept easy answers. You should not accept answers that simply confirm what you already think. If you do that, then you're no longer thinking. You're simply accepting views that you've already been taught, or that you've heard, or that you've thought since you were young. This class on suffering was very important to me. I decided that what I wanted to do was to look at the various views of suffering found in the Bible, because as it turns out, there's not a single view of why they're suffering. There are lots of different views. There are
Right. So just for your knowledge, Bart Ehrman is a theologian. He's a biblical scholar. So he's not a counter-apologist. He's not a into philosophy much at all. He really does biblical studies and studies the Bible specifically. So he's not an atheist. I think he says he's agnostic. I know that we say that's atheist, and I get that. But yeah, essentially he's not a Christian anymore. Did grow up Christian though, and the Christians absolutely hate him. because he's sort of the main authority. Him and Carrier are probably the main authorities on biblical scholarship that contradict their little narrative.
Yeah, he and Carrier are on the texts of the Bible, as the Protestant Bible at least, possibly some of the Catholic books too. Dr. Kipp specializes in the Dead Sea Scrolls and how that relates to all the Bible stuff, and he's pulled some truly amazing things about the culture of the time out of that, but very little as far as evidence for God. And then we've got Dr. Josh and other Assyriologists who study the culture of the area and as it relates to the Israelite people and their holy beliefs. So the scholars are looking at this stuff from a whole bunch of different perspectives, and nobody finds consistency or evidence for this particular God that's claimed. And it's kind of telling, like, where is this being hiding?
And so what you've got to understand is there's been a shift in biblical scholarship and understanding of what it was like in the area. There used to be a time where you had to affirm the historicity of the Bible before you could study this kind of thing, right? You had to affirm that you believed in God before you could actually study, do biblical scholarship, like, a couple of hundred years ago. We don't do that anymore.
Well,
we kind of just, some places do it, I guess. Some very, very conservative places do it. But I mean, generally in scholarship, we don't require people to affirm a stance before studying it. It's not generally done.
It's one of the ways you can tell the difference between scholars and apologists. Like, for one example, Biola University, where Sean McDowell teaches, still makes you sign an article of faith. And it's come up. I think Mike Lacona had to do it. But he mentioned in a debate at one point that while it was that debate, Bart Ehrman versus Mike Lacona, because Bart also used to work at a university that required that. And so they talked about it, and Lacona admitted that at most places it's sort of a wink and a nod thing, like you have to sign it to make the people who own all the money happy, but then you're allowed to just do whatever research you need to do. But because you've signed that statement of faith, if your research happens to lead you in a direction that the board members and the bondholders and whatnot don't like, then that's their ticket to terminate you. So,
Prophets. The prophets of the Old Testament are quite insistent that the reason the people of God suffer is because God is punishing them for their sins. Let me read for you from one of the earliest prophets, the book of Amos, where God explains why it is the people of God have been suffering.
Right, so this is his wheelhouse. I love this. He's gone straight into his wheelhouse, ignored all of the sort of philosophical arguments and said, well, let's listen to the claimed prophets of the Bible, and got his research. I love that, excuse me, I love that he's going to where he is strong, and that is Bible knowledge and interpretation.
It's because God has made them suffer. Amos chapter 4, verses 6 and following. I gave you cleanness of teeth in all your cities, and lack of bread in all your places, yet you did not return to me, says the Lord. They strayed from God. God tried to get them to come back, and how did he do it? By creating a famine, so they would starve. And yet it didn't happen. They didn't return. I withheld the rain from you when there were still 3 months to the harvest, yet you did not return to me. So he caused a drought. That didn't do the job. I struck you with blight and mildew. I laid waste your gardens and your vineyards. The locusts devoured your fig trees and your olive trees, yet you did not return to me, says the Lord. He destroyed their crops. That didn't work. I sent among you a pestilence after the manner of Egypt. I killed your young men with the sword, and yet you did not return to me, says the Lord. Therefore, thus I will do to you, O Israel. Because I will do this to you, prepare to meet your God, O Israel. For Amos, the reason people suffer, the reason the people of God suffer, is because they've disobeyed God And God is trying to get them to return by starving them, by creating drought, by bringing epidemics, by killing them.
Yeah, and this is where he would say, "Oh, that's just an appeal to emotion," and it's like, well, no, it's not. Like, that is the contradiction. Is famine a bad thing, or is that good because God's very nature says it's good?
Yeah, this is an argument that Cameron Bertuzzi from Capturing Christianity has made more than once, where he says the problem of evil is easily solved if we have good reasons for the evil, like we've discussed before. Many apologists do this. And then he rattles off a few, and he says, but chief among all of these is to get people to come to God and worship God. And I took issue with that because it's literally like turning to your abusive spouse and saying, please stop hurting me. That doesn't justify the abuse.
Right. Absolutely.
But to Cameron, that's the greatest good of all.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Well, that's an interesting view. Is that a view that you want to have? Is that the view that you want? That the reason your child died in a car accident because God was punishing you? That the reason that your parent died at such a young age of cancer was because God was punishing you? Really? There are other books of the Bible that have different points of view.
Yeah.
David's child was murdered not because of anything the child did, but because David was a naughty boy.
And tons of people in Egypt died because Pharaoh had his mind changed by God. Work that one out.
Yes, and the all-knowing God needed lamb's blood painted over doorways so he would know which babies to kill and which ones not to, because he needs signposts because he's all-knowing.
There are some books like the book of Daniel that say it's not God who's doing this to you. It's the forces of evil that are doing it to you. The devil and his minions are doing this to you. The demons are doing it to you. The powers that are in this world, the evil forces in this world are doing it to you. But it's not God. Daniel has a very different view from the view of the prophets. The book of Job has a lot to say about suffering. And part of the book of Job...
Oh, I love that he's going to... I brought this up earlier. Like, you know, God just makes him suffer to see if he'll still believe in him or not, or you know, curse him. Wow, that's awesome. I love that he's going there.
God brags because Job is so righteous. The Satan figure says, well, he's just righteous because of everything he's got. Look, you've given him everything. God says, that's not why he's being righteous. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Prove it. And so God gives Satan the authority to take away everything Job has. He loses all of his cattle, all of his possessions, all of his children, in order to see whether he's faithful to God because of everything he has. God takes away the 10 children of Job through Satan to see if Job will remain faithful.
And I must point out that Satan in the Jewish tradition is the accuser. He is the one that God uses to find people that don't believe in him. He's not a figure that is diametrically opposed to God. He's not this evil guy going around doing what God doesn't want. He is there to accuse people of not being faithful to God. He's definitely God's servant and doing his will in the Jewish tradition.
Yeah, it's so much deeper than modern Christianity has it. Where, you know, back in the days of the Levitical Jews, it wasn't so much you didn't believe in God. It's you were failing to keep all 613 commandments. Yep. That's what being faithful meant. It didn't mean belief without reason. It meant keeping the covenant, like in a marriage. Yep. You're faithful by keeping to your vows, that sort of thing. It didn't have this supernatural idea of believing without reason that we see today. And so Satan was kind of like the district attorney. He wasn't an anti-God. He was in charge of prosecuting cases. And it's, Satan is the father of lawyers, not the father of lies. But in Job's case, it was so much worse. Because, I mean, first of all, the presence of Satan in that situation also kind of indicates God's not all-knowing, but that's a whole thing that comes up throughout the book. In Genesis, God can't find Adam and Eve in his own garden, but okay. It wasn't just the children. It was his health. It was his friends. It was like he lost everything but his wife, which is a weird twist, but we can save that for another time.
Yeah.
And
Job
then
does remain faithful.
When God comes down and finally takes responsibility and says, it was I that said this should be done to you. And, Job loses his shit and he's like, why? Why me? Have I not been faithful? And God doesn't answer. God just turns around and says, were you there when I, slew Tiamat and built the dome of the heavens? And
what have you done lately, basically?
Yeah. Like, that's not answering my question, you fucker.
Yeah. Why pick on me? Well, what are you worth? Well, why can't I? It's basically, well, I did all this cool shit. Why can't I abuse you?
Yeah. And, the moral of the story, people pull all kinds of interesting things out of it, but the literal moral of the story is A, fear God, and B, even being perfectly righteous does not protect you from God being a dick. Like,
From
even the most faithful can fall under God's wrath. So always fear God. Never assume you're safe.
But it does seem like an abusive relationship where someone's like a complete dick to their spouse, to their partner or whatever, just as an absolute prick. And then them going, well, why are you doing this? And it's like, to see if you'd be faithful to me. And then them saying, well, I was always faithful. I always kept exactly, what I said I'd do. I was always a good spouse to you. And you say, well, I didn't see you at my work bringing in the bucks, and I didn't see you working to buy the car. It's the most abusive shit you could ever do in your entire life. Like, seriously. You don't get off the hook for abusing somebody because you did something earlier. Yeah, but he loves you.
And he'll set you on fire if you don't love him back.
And he wants your money. All powerful, all knowing, all wise, just no good with money. George Carlin, you will be missed.
God brags on him. Satan says it's because you haven't really hurt him yet. No, that's not why. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Prove it. And so he inflicts Job with horrible suffering, personally and physically, and Job still refuses to curse God. Testing is the reason for suffering in the book of Job. It's all a test. Is that what you want to think? You want to think that those 5 children starve to death? I'm sorry, that child starves to death every 5 seconds? A child every 5 seconds because God is testing somebody? Or he's punishing somebody?
And as I might point out, Job's kids died, and he didn't bring the kids back. He gave him 5 other kids.
Yeah.
They're dead. Like, he didn't say, oh, well, I'll resurrect what you had before.
Yeah, this was before Jesus, so God, being all-powerful like he is, couldn't resurrect them. He doesn't have that power. That takes a Jesus to do. Yeah.
Well, I mean, presumably God has the power to do that if he's, all-powerful. I don't see why it's a problem. But I just want to point out that the kids he didn't rectify matters. He just replaced them with something else. Like, I don't know.
Your house down, but here's a trailer of near equivalent market value.
Right. Great.
Part of Job, the poems of Job have a very different point of view. In the poems of Job, Job complains against God. And he says that he wants to present his case to God. He says, I'm righteous, and yet I'm suffering. His friends say, no, you must not be. You must be guilty. No, I'm righteous. No, you're not. Yes, I am.
Yeah.
And he appeals to God to appear to him so he can declare his case. I am innocent. I have not done anything wrong. And God appears to him. And instead of God giving Job a chance to talk, Job says, Who are you to question me? I am the Almighty. You are a peon. You have no right to question the Almighty. God wows him with his thunderous presence coming at him from the whirlwind, and Job is withered in the dirt. And he confesses, and he repents. But what does he repent of? He doesn't repent of his sins because he hadn't committed the sins.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. So he
Mhm.
repents of the sin of questioning God,
You'd
who,
think.
I might add, was making a bet with Satan to make him suffer.
Oh yeah, God has confessed guilt, either directly or by implication, a number of times in the Bible. Like, immediately after the flood, Genesis 34, I believe. God repents of his sin against his people and hangs the rainbow in the sky and all that stuff. I feel bad about that. I shouldn't have done it. I'm all powerful, so I'm not going to reverse it. But I'll hang a pretty rainbow in the sky.
I promise never to do it again.
Yeah.
Not by water anyway, but something else is fine. But he's right. Like, what did Job really have to repent? It's questioning God. Even though that why question, I think, is a perfectly valid question at that point. Because he's making the case that, hey, people at the time were absolutely certain that suffering was because you had violated God in some way, or you'd offended God in some way. And that's why all of the people around him were saying, but I think we're saying, oh, you must have done something. But I think you're right, Ember. I think the takeaway is that no matter what you do, you're still going to suffer. You could be the perfect person and you'll still suffer.
I think that was the original point of the story. Now, I haven't studied this the way Bart Ehrman has studied this, but it seems to me that the main reason that story became canon, as historians will tell you, Job is the oldest book of the Bible. It was written before even Genesis. But it's that part where Job says, I have not sinned, I'm righteous, I've done everything right. And his friends say, obviously not, or you wouldn't be being punished.
Right.
It's because that's a thing that still happens today. If a person gets sick, there's this portion of the population who will say, well, you must have deserved it. They haven't read their own damn book. That's why it's in the book, is to say, here is the perfect person. Because again, this is before Jesus. So this is the best a mortal can possibly do. And even he got smote. So don't you dare start judging other people who are in bad spots, because God will smite you even if you don't deserve it.
Well, it sounds like the addition to that is, hey, if you are a really good person that's doing nothing wrong and you get smote, don't you dare complain about being smote for the no reason. Don't you dare stop believing in God because of that, or else God's going to be really angry.
Yeah, I mean, look how good Job was, and he got smote. So who the fuck are you to complain? Where's your sense of objective justice? By rights, everyone should be smitten. Smoted.
Right, must have left it in my other pants.
That he asked God why it was happening. Is that the view that you want? That it's wrong even to ask why you're suffering? We don't have the right to ask God why this is happening to us? There are lots of explanations for why they're suffering in the Bible. Part of the reason I taught this class at Rutgers is because I wanted students to realize that it's a problem and that there are different explanations. The explanations that Kyle just gave are not the main explanations of any of the authors of the Bible. In fact, you can argue these explanations were very much tangential to any of the authors of the Bible. My students at Rutgers, when I was teaching this class, I'll have to admit, one of the biggest problems I had was getting them to see that there was a problem with suffering. There's a problem. While this class was being taught, it was during one of the Ethiopian famines. You probably remember those famines back in the 1980s. In this particular famine, it was especially horrible.
Yeah, they did Live Aid for that. Like, all of songwriters got together for at least one of them to sort of get food for Africa kind of thing. famine is terrible. It's horrible suffering, absolutely horrible. And like you said, Ember, we have to have gratitude that we have, you know, enough food for you know, everybody.
1 out of 8 people in Ethiopia died because of this famine. Was this God punishing them? Was it him testing them? What good does it test somebody if they die? Is it that he was trying to show them that they have no right to ask why they suffer? 1 out of 8 died. What I had to do in this class was to bring in newspaper clippings from the newspaper and show them a woman who was dying of starvation with a child on her breast who wasn't getting any milk. They were both going to die. If you believe in God, this is a problem.
Apparently not according to Kyle. Apparently that's actually great, because they're getting a test before they're being trained before they get to heaven.
Yeah. Well,
That's,
you know,
that's just hardcore training, mate. What are you talking about?
yeah, it kind of goes to that problem with the biblical view of suffering and punishment, that the suffering you are experiencing isn't necessarily for you. It's so somebody else can learn a lesson. You know, Kyle could get up there and say, well, clearly the starving people in Ethiopia are to teach the greedy Europeans to be more generous with their overabundance of food. That's biblical. That tracks. It doesn't have to be the person who's suffering who is learning the lesson.
Mhm.
You can suffer and be killed because God wants to teach King Solomon a lesson. And it's fucking weird for a supposedly benevolent God who has a perfect sense of justice, but that's what the Bible says. So that's not an insurmountable problem for Kyle. I don't like Bart's direction of argumentation, because he keeps saying, do you want to believe this? Well, whether people want to believe it or not doesn't have any bearing on whether it's true, you know?
Well, I think it should be reframed as, how can God be all good and put such suffering on people that don't deserve it? And it gets even worse, by the way, because if those Ethiopians didn't believe in a God, then presumably they're suffering for eternity as well.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
You should not settle for simple answers, even if they're given to you by somebody who is a very convincing speaker and is very confident. You should think for yourself and try to figure out why you think there is such suffering in the world. Well, after I taught this class, I kept thinking about the topic, and I thought about it for another 20 years before I wrote my book that dealt with the issues in the class, the book that deals with the biblical views of suffering, a book that came out about 5 years ago or so, 6 years ago. During those intervening 20 years, I kept experiencing suffering, either personally or seeing it firsthand. Cancer taking away loved ones in the prime of life, teenage suicide, birth defects, failed marriages, a friend who had escaped the killing fields of Cambodia, homelessness, poverty. And I kept reading about suffering in the world.
Yeah, and this sort of, I get that it is kind of an appeal to emotion, but I think that, you know, you listen to Kyle and it's just trivialized kind of thing. This suffering is very, very trivial and unimportant kind of thing. Like, he just glosses over it.
Yeah,
And
it's like, those people are dead, therefore they no longer matter. I'm still alive, so fuck them.
yeah, it's very,
Very
very
gross.
strange. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
very gross. And if you've got any empathy, we should realize that this suffering, it isn't just, you know, an annoyance or a you know, this is truly evil stuff. I don't, yeah, I
On a lighter note,
Wars.
yeah,
I see that giant crowd, and that sure is a whole lot of people who came to look at a butt this evening.
butts are popular. Are you a butt person? Are you a butt person?
I'm more legs.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Genocides in numerous places, Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur, ethnic cleansings, the flu epidemic that Kyle wanted to write off. 30 million people died of the flu. More people died in America of the flu in 1918 than died in all the wars of the 20th century combined, of the flu. It wasn't because of their free will. I got to a point where none of the biblical answers or the traditional answers were satisfying to me. The answers may be satisfying to you. It may be enough to say to you, look, you have free will, so of course you can use your free will to hurt people, and so people will be hurt when you exercise your free will, and that's why they're suffering. That may be satisfying to you. It may be satisfying to you to think, well, okay, it's bad now, but I'm going to die and I'll have an afterlife, and so it'll be made right then. That may be enough for you. If it's enough for you, fine. I used to believe in a God who intervened in this world. When I was a Christian...
Well, I think he missed the point that it's not just free will that comes into it. When you have things like the influenza virus killing off so many things, so many things, so many people, that's not free will. That's not a choice people made. Like, nobody invented that or had agency in that. That's something that presumably, according to Carl Butt's like worldview, that God made and inflicted upon us for some reason that presumably is a good reason, but we don't know why. So I think he's missed a step there. It's kind of, you don't have to go to free will. All you can do is point out the things that humans haven't been responsible for.
I think there may be a misunderstanding with the use of the term free will. Like,
right.
in this context, it clearly isn't the people who died from Spanish flu, their choices leading them to contract and suffer from Spanish flu, and other people who did much more wicked things surviving that particular plague. I think it's more that when confronted with situations like that are patently unjust, that have nothing to do with a person's relative goodness or wickedness, seeing those and the contradictions with what you've been told about Scripture and choosing to continue to believe there's an all-good God behind it, that's the free will. It's when you deliberately override your own thinking, your logic, your critical thought processes. That's an act of free will.
Well, it's interesting. I know this story from the influenza, the Spanish flu, right? That particular flu that killed so many people. It was like a third of the world's population or something. It was insane. So basically, the scientists, doctors, and scientists in America, and don't forget, it was a long time ago now. They asked the volunteers in the prison system to test the flu on and see if they could study it. And so they had all these volunteers, and the only people that got sick from those tests were the scientists working on it. Now, why was that? And you know, some of the scientists died, kind of thing, and some of the doctors died. But why was that? It was because the flu had already been through the prisons. Right? We didn't understand about antibodies and how they worked. Right? We didn't understand that once you have antibodies, you can get sick again, but it's not going to be that bad, or you're just immune to it. So, of course, none of the prisoners got sick. They had antibodies, but the scientists didn't. So they're the ones that got sick and died. So does God just have a really awesome sense of humor? Is that a joke? What is that? Or is that just the natural world being the natural world?
God does hate scientists. They ask too many questions. Yeah,
that is true. That is true.
That's the God that I believed in. The God of the Bible is a God who intervenes. He intervenes to circumvent free will, and he intervenes to overcome the laws of nature. God can do minor miracles like making an iron axe head float on the water. God can do spectacular miracles, like parting the waters of an entire sea so that the children of Israel can walk through on dry ground while the entire Egyptian army is destroyed when the waters return. God can make the sun stand still in the sky for an entire day so Israel's army can win their battle, making the earth stop rotating with no physical after effects recorded. God can intervene in nature.
Yeah, not to mention, flooding the entire world as well. Let's not forget about that little chestnut. As well as, just creating out of nothing, out of thin air. Well, not even air, just nothing. So what are we talking about here? And you're basically talking about a God that has the power to destroy the world, because apparently he's going to do it, according to the Christians.
Well, there's destroy the world, and then there's destroy the world. Like, with Noah's flood, the rainbow thing was, I won't destroy the world that way again. But he didn't actually destroy the world. He just wiped out all life on it.
Well, destroy our world, I guess, is more accurate than destroy our civilizations.
Yeah. I mean, in theory, he could unmake the world. The story of Genesis, it's, a blatant ripoff of other creation myths. Like, oh, your God can kill a dragon and build the world out of that. Well, ours just spoke it into existence, so our God's better, But it describes how the earth, as we understand it, is hanging over oblivion, and God could just roll it up, and all of existence goes in the trash chute.
God's son in the Bible is born of a woman who has never had sex. As an adult, his son defies the law of nature at will, walking on the water, calming the storm with a word, healing the sick, raising the dead, himself rising from the dead. The God of the Bible is bound to no natural law. He defies natural law whenever he wants to do good for his people. When people are suffering, the God of the Bible intervenes. He saves them from slavery in Egypt, and he saves their souls for eternity. God intervenes in the Bible. And so my question is, and has been now for a number of years, if the God of the Bible intervenes, why doesn't he intervene? The Holocaust killed 6 million Jews and 5 million others, homosexuals, Poles, various people, 11 million people. Does God intervene when people are suffering or not?
No.
There are genocides. There are terrorists.
No, God doesn't intervene when people are truly suffering, but he does help people find their car keys, apparently, which is baffling to me.
Attacks. God intervenes in the course of nature in the Bible. But what about that child who dies every 5 seconds? What about those 25 people who die every minute because they have unclean water? What about those 300 people who die every hour from malaria? If God intervenes, why doesn't he intervene? I know many of you think that God does intervene regularly. For me, I have questions. Let me reaffirm, I am not intent on converting you to my point of view. But if you think that there are answers to why they're suffering, I want you to think more about it. And I want you to question your answers, especially if you're given easy answers.
Nice. Yeah, they were very glib. And they didn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, I don't think he's sort of not even playing on the same level as Kyle at the moment. He's sort of just saying, hey, these answers are way too easy, and they're too, I do like his style. I think he's missed a few things along the way, but I do like his style. I really do.
Easy answers are almost certainly wrong. If you can explain the greatest problem that the human race...
I did not like that.
No, he didn't, but I think it's also because that doesn't necessarily follow. Easy answers are almost always wrong. Sometimes it is the easy answer. Sometimes Occam's razor, you go for the less complicated solution.
Well, easy and simple aren't the same necessarily. But I don't think he framed that terribly well. Like,
I don't think so either.
Intuitive answers are wrong more often than not.
Right.
Quick, made up, off the cuff answers have a much higher probability of being wrong than researched answers.
Yeah, I suppose it matters what easy means in that context kind of thing. I think you're right. I think that intuitive answers or answers that come easily is what maybe he sort of would say, or he should have said. But yeah, I think that's not true. Like, yeah, if because most stuff like murders and things, they know who did it. It's incredibly obvious kind of thing. It doesn't make it incorrect. So I think that definitely was a misstep.
Has ever faced in 20 seconds or less, you're probably misexplaining it. I simply want you to think. I want you to realize that, in fact, the Bible is a complicated set of books with a number of different views of things, including, by the way, 2 books that explicitly deny that there's an afterlife, the book of Ecclesiastes and the book of Job. There are numerous views in the Bible, and there are numerous views that have developed since then. And the best thing we can do as human beings is try to figure it out for ourselves. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, that was short and sweet.
Yeah,
that might be a good place to leave it. Actually, I was just going to get through Bart Ehrman's opening, but that was a lot shorter than Carl's. Maybe he ceded the rest of his time. Is it just me, or was that like way shorter than Carl's opening?
I think so. But on the other hand, we didn't have as much to say, as is often the case. Kyle barely could get a sentence out without 3 things that needed to be corrected.
Damn, it's almost like he's trying for a record. How many really dodgy things can I say in 15 minutes kind of thing? Like, seriously, he could bullshit for his country. No, I feel like that was shorter. I feel like that was shorter. Carl's was 20 minutes. I'm looking at the timestamp. Yeah, so Carl's was 20 minutes. And Bart Ehrman's was... I'm gonna be wrong, aren't I? Oh, sure am. I'm sure wrong. They're both 20 minutes. Damn. No, it's fine. They're the same one. I think there was way less to disagree about. I think Bart Ehrman did make some missteps, though. I think his sort of like rolling off glibly. If you get an easy answer, it's almost certainly wrong. Not sure about that. I'm really not sure about that.
I think he was. It reminds me a lot of a quote Arthur Eddington made, and I am bad with quotes, so I can't remember it exactly. But it was something along the lines of, it was a response to Einstein's statement that if you can't explain something to a 5-year-old in a way they can understand, you don't really understand it yourself. And, Eddington, huge Einstein fan. He was the guy who proved general relativity experimentally because Einstein couldn't at the time. But he said something to the lines of, if you can take the most complicated and most sophisticated science on Earth that only a handful of people even understand and think you can explain it in a way a 5-year-old will grasp it, you probably don't understand it.
Right. But I think I would agree vehemently, though, that an easy, simple answer probably needs more investigation. If someone gives you a very simple, easy answer to a complex question, you probably need to look further into it, because complex questions don't have easy answers.
Yeah. That idea that when someone rattles off a quick platitudinous answer, it's a red flag. It's not a guarantee, but there's a very high potential that either they made it up or someone else did, and they're just parroting that, because these things can be hard to think about. So You know, the same thing we run into with a lot of apologists, where,
Right.
you know, they'll throw up an answer and then we'll spend an hour showing how that answer is incorrect. And they'll go,
Yep.
well, that may be true, but I have an answer and you don't.
Right.
Therefore, my position is still superior.
Right. Like that sort of, you think that you came from a acorn or whatever. The actual answer is way more complex. Or, you know, you think you're related to a strawberry. It's not wrong, but the answer is way more, like, it needs further investigation than that. You know, the answer isn't as simple as you're making it out to be. And so I think that's what Bart Ehrman meant, but it just, the phrasing was like, you know, you could see but that complete but jump all over it. You know, you could see him go, gotcha. And in a way, he's right. It wasn't a very considered thing to say. And I think that he would have been better clarifying it as, look, if you have a simple answer to a complex question, it usually needs more refinement. Complex questions have complex answers. They don't have simple answers. You know, simple questions can have simple answers, sure.
Yeah. 2 + 2, 4. Now, if you ask why, that gets into a rather long discourse.
Right. Right, but it doesn't necessarily make it untrue. That's the thing. So he's equating easy answers as being usually, you know, not true. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. Although I would say that simple answers to complex questions are usually untrue, especially when it's sort of an apologist giving it. But you know, that's neither here nor there. I have. Don't get me wrong. I am familiar with Bart. I am familiar with him. I'm familiar with my Bart. Okay, my Bart. I'm aware of. I've seen my Bart before. Oh, but my Bart. The I haven't seen this level of almost Hovind level. Everything he says is wrong. Like everything he says has so many holes in it. It's Swiss cheese. I haven't seen that out of him. I probably should have expected it, but I don't know. For some reason, I wasn't, and I don't know why. You've probably seen more butt than I have, Ember.
It's possible. I don't know. I did watch one of his series for the World Video Bible School thing. I can't remember if I actually made a video about that or not, but I did watch the whole thing in preparation to make a video about it. I may not have, though, because, you know, his arguments are very basic. It's the same 5 things every apologist says, you know?
Yeah. He isn't very innovative, I must admit. Yeah, I'm astounded at the amount that he sort of did that was, I mean, it would be great to see the rebuttal period, because this does have a rebuttal, which is just hilarious that we've got a rebuttal, a rebuttal.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to make it work. Somebody stop me. I'm just yeah. Thoroughly plumbing the depth of your butt. Yes, Luna. Yes. But he, you know, this level, this is from 8 years ago, so he may have gotten better. I think he has gotten better with these statements kind of thing, but this was just a long stream of diarrhea from the butt. It really was. It was awful. So yeah.
Yeah, but on the other hand, he did accurately predict what Bart was going to say, and while his rebuttal was kind of crappy, he did kind of lay a little bit of poisoning the well there. So it was semi-effective.
That's true. But I don't think he was expecting the go to the Bible for all of this ideas of suffering. I think that maybe he'll try and avoid it. Like trying to avoid it like the plague, the Bible like the plague, because he knows that isn't his strong point, and it is Bart Ehrman's. He knows that Bart Ehrman knows way more about the text than he does. So I'm thinking he will avoid that and try to live in a, oh, well, this is philosophically, logically, what's possible, plausible, probable, all of this kind of stuff, because that's not where Bart Ehrman's strength is.
I think he's going to quote Ansel Adams again.
Ansel Adams is his strong. His go-to guy is Ansel Adams, a guy with the honorary doctorate. But like, how dishonest is it to say, hey, this is a academic with a doctorate, and it's a photographer with an honorary doctorate? Nothing against him. Like, he's probably a fantastic photographer, but you can't use him as an authority like that. And someone with an honorary doctorate, you can't say, hey, they're a doctor, and use that as an authority. It's so dishonest. Yeah.
I think he imagined that he'd get away with it, and it appears, well, we haven't gotten to the rebuttals yet, but I don't think it's an important enough thing that Bart's going to bother, even if he's aware that that's the same Ansel Adams.
I don't even, maybe he doesn't know who I didn't know who he was. Like, I had no idea. I've never heard of this person before. And maybe, like, I can only think that Kyle, he's sort of maybe intimidated that he's up against a doctor of Bible studies, and he's trying to pull out his own doctor, and that's the best one he could find. I mean,
yeah, it's the typical apologist cherry picking. It's like, here's a thing that says what I needed to say, so let's make the source seem as credible as possible, yada, yada, yada. But I get it.
There's plenty of apologists with doctorates. Like, why Ansel Adams? I don't understand.
Because he's a secular scholar or something.
But he's not even, like, his doctorate is not even tangentially related to the subject. Like, he's not a doctor of philosophy. It's doctor of fine arts. If they were discussing, like, whether a painting proved the existence of God or indicated that would be one thing. But what the hell?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird.
So now that I have access to Google, I did look it up. According to PBS biography, the Adamses in general were cultured liberals who did not belong to any organized religion. However, Ansel's father, Charles, was heavily influenced by Ralph Waldo Emerson's writings, and he believed strongly in transcendentalist ideas of individuality and direct union with God in nature, which he transmitted to Ansel. And that tracks. I mean, I could see Ansel being an agnostic, but still having this reverence for nature, because he did spend an awful lot of time out there.
But even if he was like the sort of I don't know. It's just really weird. It's just really weird.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. It's
like, he's a doctor of arts. And don't get me wrong. What the hell?
I almost wish we could invite Kyle on and pick his brain and be like, why did you go with Ansel Adams out of all people? Like, my goodness.
Yeah, it's baffling. But mind you, like, in a debate, you don't have time to look that up. And secondly, maybe none of the people are going to know who it is either. So his audience just go, oh, yes, this prominent secular science authority.
Yeah, I mean, unless there's a photography nerd in the crowd, they're probably just going to go,
right.
Oh, I've heard that name before. Therefore, close enough.
All right. Well, I mean, don't be a butt. Get the right sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah, sort out your shit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's a good place to leave it. I'll send you it over. So next week we'll be going to your channel, and we've got to switch sometime so you can choose them as well. We've got to do that. I'll try and find something really short for the next one on mine. So we can switch it. If you do find something that's really short, send it over, and we can do that one. Maybe something that's more a discussion than a debate. Maybe, you know, something that doesn't go for 1.5 hours or so, and maybe just half an hour or something. Because we never get through it. We got through 40 minutes of this one, and I'm blaming Kyle for that.
That's fair.
You know, hashtag blame the butt. Hashtag blame the butt. Fantastic. Well, anything to add about the first half of that?
I think we covered all the bases as we went, really. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, philosophically, I'm on Bart's side, but I don't think either one of them presented a really compelling case, and Kyle has that home turf advantage sort of deal. So
That's true. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think that if Bartman paid attention, and you know, he can really clobber Kyle in the rebuttal section. I really think so. And I think that yeah, I think Kyle's incredibly vulnerable from everything that he's been saying. I don't think Bart Ehrman particularly is, and sort of Kyle did a pre-butt. He did the rebuttal already, kind of thing. So, you know, I don't know what he's going to talk about in the rebuttal. I've got a feeling he might just go off on tangents again, because some of his sort of, you know, arguments wasn't even related to the topic of the discussion. So I don't know. I feel like I can't trust him to stay on topic now. Just saying.
Yeah, I don't know that he really has that capability. Like, it's the preacher part of him. Like, he has to randomly go off on moral objective justice and so, like, what are you talking about? Can we talk about suffering? Because ironically or coincidentally, depending on your point of view, all the digressions away from suffering are causing suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining me. And thank you so much, Ember. It was absolutely wonderful. Next week, we will be on Better Than Ember. Amazing channel, and I'll link it in the description.
Right down there. Yeah.
Right down there. Yeah. So all of the but they can't click on that. Well, if they can, they've got powers that I envy, because I can't do that. All that happens when I do that is I pause the video, but never mind. So yeah, we'll be on Better Than Ember. Great channel. Do subscribe. If you want to drop a like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Don't feel compelled, but it really does help us out. What are we up to? So I'm also working on a gaming channel. I've just rebranded it because I was unhappy with the last brand. So yeah, there's that. I probably should find it, but I'm kind of I might move on.
It's no longer Beast of the Mark?
No. I like every time I went to say it, like when I'm doing a video or I'm playing a game, my brain goes, is it Beast of the Mark or Mark of the Beast? And it stalls. I grind gears with this thing. So I went, no, I'm going back to my original gamer tag that I was originally known for years and years and years. I'm going back to Vector Slide. So that was my gamer name. I don't know if you're ever involved in the gaming culture. We've all got gamer names. I know people like, you know, Warlord and Backwards and all of these people with these really cool superhero names, because you just choose a name that represents you. And yeah, so I'm going back to my original roots with that one, which is cool. I like it. And I don't have to work out which way to say this thing, which is causing my brain to break every time I try it.
That's fair. Yeah.
Maybe it's a bit of latent dyslexia for that or something. I don't know, but every time I go to do it, I'm like, welcome to Beast of the Mark.
Yeah.
You know, like it was just that second of going, wait, which way round is it? No, it's not working. No, throw it out the window. It's not working for me. It's not bringing me joy. It's not bringing me joy. We have to Mary. What's her name? Mary. Kuko, you throw out anything that doesn't bring you joy.
I don't know. Her name didn't bring me joy.
Okay, cool. That's fine. Yeah, but thank you so much. What have you got coming up, Ems? What are you up to?
I'm plotting and scheming assorted mischief. I mean, I have a bit more instability in my life than usual. Car blew up again, and it's causing a tremendous amount of stress. But all that notwithstanding, tomorrow I've got my normal Sunday show leading into Maya's Bad Science Sunday, which is one of the best things on the internet and everyone should watch. I do a lead-in show many Sundays, not every Sunday,
Right.
because of chaos. But this
Yeah.
Sunday, definitely. And I'm having Dave from Captive Desk over, and we're gonna laugh at Hugh Ross talk about aliens and probably other things. And so it should be a really good time.
Nice.
In theory, on Monday, I'm gonna be reviewing a couple of transphobes. Kathleen Stock, one of the most famous transphobes of the Turf Islands, was in my neighborhood last week, and it spun my head around. So I found a copy of her presentation at Cornell University of all places, and I'm gonna review that, and then also one of the two turfs in France. Apparently, there's only two. And yeah, really, really funny. So theoretically, Monday afternoon, only because I have a vague idea of what time I get out of work on Monday and I don't know the rest of the week. But the time on that one is subject to change. If I get out earlier than I think, I may go live sooner. If I get out later than I think, I may have to postpone it to another day. So if you're interested in that one, make sure to click the notify me button so that whenever the hell it goes live, you'll be notified.
Right. You'll be notified. Yeah. Yeah, that's always good. All right,
Yeah.
fantastic. I've probably got I'm not sure what I'm coming up this week, but I definitely will, as always, I will definitely be doing Fundamentalist Fails on Friday. So keep posted for that. I did promise somebody that I would do an ARC video, and they're always fun. Trying to get, watch creationists trying to explain the ARC away is always hilarious. So there's always plenty of those. So thank you so much to everybody. I just included my gamer channel there because I actually found the damn thing. Yeah, and don't forget, as always, be kind to yourself and be kind to others. You don't need objective morality to be kind to others, and expect them to be kind to you back. It's reciprocity. And if we all be kind, then we will live in a much better world. But thank you so much, everybody, and take care. I will definitely see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Night, folks.